Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 637, part 2 of our anniversary look at Camelot 3000. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge. I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot, the Duke of You-Know, the Sultan of Strategery, the indestructible bridge-defying, no longer wonders why Sean is so glad to label him the King Arthur of this podcast, the elder statesman of the podcast, Segulin.
How's it going, eh?
Jim, on this episode, we're going to be talking about issues 7 through 12 of the great Camelot 3000. We are sponsored, as always, by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. Jim, what's going on over at DCBService.com?
Well, they always have these great deals on comic books, and we've been going through it in statues and action figures and whatnot. But they also, by the way, have the free comic book day 2022 out there. So the Dark Crisis special is there. So if you're not able to get to a regular comic shop, you've got our online friends here at DCBS. So thank you, DCBS.
Over at InStockTrades.com, they have some cool new releases. One in particular is Batman the Long Halloween Catwoman When in Rome. This one's often missed because they talk about Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Don't miss this one because it's an important story in that series. $49.99 regularly, 42% off, only $28.99. They also have The Man of Steel hardcover, volume 4. This is the old John Byrne, Jerry Ordway series, which is incredible. $49.99 regularly, 42% off, only $28.99. And the Superman Batman Omnibus hardcover, volume 2, $125 regularly, 42% off, only $72.50. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Jim, I want to announce an upcoming exhibit that actually kicks off April 1st. It's called Superheroes, Orphans and Origins, 125 Years in Comics. This is going to be kicked off by the Foundling Museum over in the UK, and it runs from April 1st to August 22nd. And this spring, the Foundling Museum presents the first major exhibition to explore the representation of foundlings, orphans, adoptees, and foster children in comics. DC Superman, who was found by his adoptive parents, is one of many comic heroes who are orphans. Spider-Man's parents die in a plane crash. Batman's parents are killed in a street robbery. And Black Panther, whose mother dies soon after childbirth and whose father is killed, is known as the Orphan King. Marvel's X-Men experience both discrimination and social ostracization. The superheroes' early life experiences impact on their roles and stance they take over good and evil in comics' lives. Examining over a century of mainstream comics, graphic novels, and sequential art from around the world, Superheroes, Orphans and Origins, 125 Years in Comics, explores the challenging origins and complex identities of some of the most popular figures in comics. We're going to have links in the show notes directly to the Foundling Museum and to more details on this exhibit. So please be sure to check it out. This looks really, really cool, and it's going to be running for a nice long time. So if you live in the UK or are going to be visiting, this is something that's going to be a destination you're going to want to check out. Jim, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler show. We go in-depth into plot lines, story twists, and whatnot of Camelot 3000. So if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Let's talk some comics.
There they are, all alone except for that old character.
Our continuing discussion this episode is going to be on Camelot 3000 issues 7 through 12. Mike W. Barr and Brian Boland are the writer, co-creator, and artists. Terry Austin is the inker on Chapter 7 through 12. Dick Giordano was an inker on Chapter 6, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it last episode, so I'm going to reference it here just to make sure that he's just such an iconic creator. I want to make sure that we mention him for ink. Tatiana Wood on colors, John Costanza, easy for me to say, on letters. Original series cover art by Brian Boland. And continuing legends chronicled by Sir Thomas Mallory. It's chapter 7 through 12. Now, you, I think, as of our last recording, had actually read at least if not all of this. I had not, and I was purposefully that I did not read any of 7 through 12, just because I didn't want to, in our discussion, give away any of what was going to happen. I really wanted it to be about chapters 1 through 6. So now I actually can talk about what it was like, and we can both talk about what it was like to read now this whole thing as a 12-issue volume. As a complete package, it was a very satisfying story with some twists and turns along the way. Some of the things were things in my mind that like they teased were going to happen, fulfilled themselves in a very satisfying way, which I'm a fan of. There are other things that I didn't see coming. I really liked that aspect of this story. It feels like a continuing legacy of... I mentioned the movie Excalibur on the last episode. I honestly felt like you could say that that movie happened, then this happened. And, I mean, it's as far as the legend goes, you and I have both read quite a bit of Arthurian legend, various different kinds along the way. What did you think as a whole story? Now that we've had a chance to, where we can really talk about it without having to worry about spoiling the second half.
Well, and it was funny because I had all intention of just reading 1 through 6 and just commenting on 1 through 6, you know, in our first segment. But I'll be honest with you, I was so into the story, I couldn't wait. I had to see what happens, and I had to read it. And I did. I don't think I spoiled anything on 7 through 12 last recording, but it was funny because there was so many times like I wanted to say something and I couldn't. But this story really had me locked in to the point where I couldn't wait. I had to continue on. I had to see what happened to these characters and see how they carried the story because, as you said, I absolutely loved this story. I loved this version of the Arthurian legend. And it is that continuation of what was previously discussed. And it felt so true to the heart and soul of what is, you know, the Camelot story that I was like, this is absolutely brilliant. And it was something that I loved. And I've always said how I enjoy the rise of Camelot more than the fall of Camelot. You know, and a lot of the stories will have it'll have the fall of Camelot, but then it'll have that kind of quasi happy ending. You know, usually it's the legend of Arthur, you know, will continue. He'll return one day, and that's kind of like their happy ending. And this story kind of gives us a happy ending, and it continues on with that, but a little bit of a twist to it. And I liked how they did that. And I also enjoyed the way they did this fall, you know, because it was, you know, it still had all the classic elements of it, but it wasn't. I didn't want to reach in the story and smack people as much as I normally do when I'm reading the story, when I'm watching a movie, or when any of the various formats that I've viewed the story. Usually when we get to the start of the fall, I just want to yell at them, say, dudes, relax. If you just calm down right now, Camelot would be fine, but you're blowing it. And the way they lay this out, I kind of understand where all the parties are coming from. And I think that was a great little twist on the story where I wasn't as angry at the different characters throughout this. I still got my issues with some of them, but again, I'm like, I get the groove. I understand what's going on here.
There's a tragedy to this story, and there's a tragedy to Arthur. And I think it's something in my favorite stories of Arthurian legend that like manifest themselves. This idea that there's all this responsibility to be the king, what he's trying to do and trying to bring the people together, and the responsibility of the crown versus responsibility to the man of Arthur, you know, where he loves Guinevere. He really genuinely loves Guinevere and values the friendship with Lancelot to the point where Lancelot's like a brother to him. But yet there is this devotion to being king and to the mantle and what he's trying to do and to the subjects and to the idea and concepts of Camelot that you're mentioning, the rise of Camelot, that it supersedes this idea of being a man and developing a relationship with his wife. She gets left in the background. And I'm not saying that she's a victim in this. I don't mean it that way, because she makes some choices where it's one of the things I really like about them is they're human, right? So yeah. Guinevere's flawed. Arthur's flawed. Lancelot's flawed. And those flaws are genuine human flaws that we all face to varying degrees. And I like that part of this story, that you never at any point in time, I don't give a complete pass to Lancelot ever. I don't give a complete pass to Guinevere. I do think that they know what they're doing is wrong, but yet there's a rightness in the fact that they love each other genuinely. Like, that love's real between Guinevere and Lancelot. And there's an honesty to that love. But there's an honesty that she loves Arthur and Arthur loves her too. It is, if there's one thing this story I don't think showcases really well, is Arthur and Guinevere's love for each other. It really feels like that ship has sailed and like they're retreading old ground, and it really is, she's all in on Lancelot in this story, which I kind of get because it's a sequel and like they gave into that love in the past, and now that they're reincarnated, as much as there's that reconnection between Arthur and Guinevere, it's really her reestablishing herself as queen versus reestablishing herself as the love of Arthur's. And the marriage between the two of them, as we saw in the first 6 issues, was really a last grasp by Arthur and through Merlin's kind of coaxing to like, look, let's formalize this because they're not really cheating on you because there's no marriage to cheat on. So if you really want to take some charge of this, don't you kind of got to formalize the fact that you two are a married couple? And it was kind of like, from where though? I mean, yes, it's love. And I think Guinevere genuinely loves Arthur, but I don't think it's the kind of, nor will it ever be, the passionate love that she has for Lancelot. And this story really does a great job of conveying the fact, like, at the end, if you were to ask me if I team Lancelot or team Arthur for Guinevere, it's totally team Lancelot in this story, where I feel bad for the two of them because there is this sense of what we did was wrong. You're married to Arthur, and those vows mean something, and he's our king, and we both love him. And there's a loyalty there. But in truth, she really loves Lancelot in this story. And I thought that was something that was interesting, that was really more focused in this one, was the idea that if you were to ask me in this story who she should be with, it was very clear to me that she should be with Lancelot. Even though he shows his own humanity at various times, I felt much more the deep love, the passionate love as a couple with Lancelot. They both love Arthur and respect the man, but I don't think she loves Arthur in the capacity, in this story, in the capacity that she does Lancelot. And it was an interesting sort of different take on it.
I know, actually, yeah. And it's funny, one of the things that in a lot of prior stories that used to annoy me, and anger me, was the infidelity. Yeah. I used to get angry over, not just, I got more angry at Lancelot than at Guinevere, to be honest with you. Because usually, a lot of times, the female does take more of the damage than the male does. And whenever there's any type of infidelity, people will always go after the woman instead of the man, usually. And especially back in this time period where the story's taking place, 100%, they put it on, Guinevere was sentenced to death. Lancelot was banished. Big difference there, and that was always something that always used to anger me, because I'm like, Lancelot's this knight of nobility and honor. Why are they not, sentencing him to die as well? That was something that always used to get annoyance. And I liked how with this story you kind of understand why Lancelot does what he does. In the first half, there's a little bit of a smarminess. I was like, I don't like this Lancelot. But as you said, they weren't technically married, so it's okay. And then when they get married, Lancelot flat out was like, hey, we did it once. We're not gonna betray that vow. We're not gonna do that this time. And I believed him when I was reading the story in the first half that he 100% was done. Even though he 100% loved her with all his heart, he was not going to continue, and then you see in the betrayal how that continues. I was like, man, this is absolutely brilliant explaining this, because I'm not angry at Lancelot in this. I really understand where he's coming from, and I'm really not even that angry at Guinevere over this. I'll be honest, I'm more angry at Arthur and Merlin, because if Arthur and Merlin had not insisted on the marriage, and had to call her Queen Guinevere, him King Arthur, but not have them actually be married, things would have been better for New Camelot. And it's like that whole, it's modern times, guys. Let's, go with the flow here. Do you technically need to be married? And it was one of those things that I really liked in the story where it got me thinking, like, what if they never got married? What if they didn't get married and there was no technically infidelity? She's Queen Guinevere based on the past life, not based on the current marriage. Could Arthur and Guinevere survive? Now, we saw at the wedding in the last series how much hope that gave people. So you would lose that bit. But I don't. It's one of those things where I'm like, in my head, I'm arguing with myself back and forth whether you needed that marriage versus having the peace of them not being married and not this have this be infidelity and or betrayal.
But that's the manipulation of Merlin, right? And Merlin is not, it's the son of the devil, those type of things. Merlin, and it's my favorite stories. It's not that like. There's good versus evil, but it's what goes back to the flaw, right? Merlin is not a good guy. Like, Merlin's fighting for the right cause, but he's not a good guy. He's manipulative and has his own agendas and things like that in this. And Arthur, I actually prefer that Arthur is a much more human king, where you look at him and he makes mistakes and he makes bad choices, and even banishments and things like that. It's kind of like, dude, you knew this was going to happen. Now you're banishing them for it? Like, why did you do it? Like, why marry her if you knew this was going to happen? Right. Like, so he deliberately married her so that way when infidelity did happen, he could do this. Huh?
Exactly. That's the flaw. And again, I like how this... really, if you think about it, Camelot is a tragedy. And you said that earlier, and I completely agree with you. It does follow the grounds of the tragedy, even though it's this great epic adventure, this great epic legend story. It's kind of like how with Romeo and Juliet, I always cringe when people say, oh, it's the great love story. No, it's the great tragedy.
Yeah.
Both characters die in the end. It's not a love story. This does have that tragedy element, and it's one of those things where I do like how they can kind of put a spin at the end, so it's not a complete tragedy, but in the end, this is a tragedy because we have these character flaws that come out and take away from, what should, if they truly and 100% lived towards that noble, knightly honor code, none of this stuff would have happened, and they would have 100% been, but they're human. They've got flaws. They make mistakes. They're going to do these little things, and that's what's going to compile on it, and that's what's going to cause your problems. It's those great stories where the people, the heroes, have these character traits to them that you're like, okay, they're not perfect. And I like having those imperfections, because if they were 100% perfect, then it wouldn't be as fun of a story. It wouldn't be as interesting.
We talk a little bit about Sir Tristan's story, because another gripping story and really cutting edge at the time. You look back what they were doing in the 80s. It's kind of one of the reasons why when people like in the media will get mad today over certain things like John Kent's story, for example, that was going on in the Superman Son of Krypton. Or son of, what is it, Superman?
Son of Kal-El.
Son of Kal-El, sorry, thank you. The big uproar from some people. I have friends of mine who don't read comics regularly who were, like, blasting the fact that, like, oh, DC's just catering to what's going on today's mass media and things like that. And I'm, like, sitting here like, dude, comics have been a medium that has explored all kinds of social issues for the entirety of my life. And you take a look at this story, and I'm so glad I'm reading this now, because I would have loved this back in the day, but it's great to read it now fresh and realize, like, yeah, again, case in point, this is back in the 80s, and look what they were doing with Sir Tristan. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about today that we're becoming more enlightened about as a society was being dealt with here.
Yes.
In very early years where we didn't know. I mean, back in the 80s, there was an ignorance to what people go through. I'm going to throw myself in that category. I didn't understand, kind of issues that people deal with regards to gender identity. And this story with Sir Tristan really was touching on and opening up a lot of those concepts. And I love that there's not a clean resolution to it at the end. And that's something that I think was great about this story. There's an ending to this story, but it's not a cut and dry. You mentioned happy ending. It's not a cut and dry happy ending. It is a happy ending, but with twists and turns, and you could almost follow this up with a whole other sequel. And I love stories that dangle those threads where you're left as a reader afterwards to interpret them. Where is this going to go? What did it mean? What's Tristan's life going to be like after this? And I really enjoyed the exploration of that character. It, in some ways, went places that I thought it was going to go. They were like teasing a direction for it. And I loved so much so that it didn't. Like where Tristan at the end, Tristan's nobility and who Tristan is, won out over choices that could have been made. But there's a tragedy to the story of Sir Tristan as well, because I don't know that Sir Tristan will ever find peace in that world. I think Sir Tristan will find a better life than Sir Tristan has had, but I don't think it will be a simple, easy life. You hope for it, because I like Tristan. I like Isolde, and if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. And I like Tom a great deal. You kind of wonder, will Tristan ever encounter Tom again in the future, and what would that be like? Because I felt like there was so much left there of like, there's feelings for Tom's, there's feelings for Isolde. What is Tristan's real path? And I feel all of that was genuine and just being explored. Just like you could do a miniseries on Tristan after this.
Yes.
And I would so instantly read it because I thought what they were exploring there was great. And we had this great night. And I thought it was just a really cool story.
Oh, God, yeah. And it's, Tristan is one of the characters in this that I really and deeply wanted to see what happened.
Yeah.
That was when I read the first 6, I had to know Tristan was one of the ones I had to know what happened. Because again, you understand, he is a man in a woman's body. He's not a woman. And I love the fact that
Do you think it's that simple?
But that's the thing. It's not. And that's the cool part, because he has all those memories of when they were Amber. So it has all that kind of stuff going on, but Tristan is not Amber, and it's one of those things where has all that knowledge, all that experience, all that prior time and emotions and everything that was when they were a woman, but now there's a man running it. And men, we're idiots when it comes to a lot of stuff. Flat out, we are. And I think a female who's in a man's body would probably handle it better than a man in a woman's body.
Sure.
Just to be honest, because again, as I said, we're idiots when it comes to emotional stuff and just the general, just a general dealing with that kind of stuff.
Case in point, though, he did actually, Guinevere was, and some of the stuff we'll just gloss over when we get to it, but Guinevere at one point in time and Tristan are having a conversation around all this. And Tristan's like, well, what if you were a man?
Yeah.
Reincarnated as a man, and you're now encountering Lancelot. How would you feel? What would that mean for you? I think you're right. I think Guinevere would have handled it better. But how would Lancelot have handled it? How would that have gone? And I think the love between the two of them was one that I don't think that would have stopped them. But I think it would have been an issue, that they would have had to address. And it would have been interesting. You're right. It would have been interesting. Actually, funny. It would have been interesting to see how that was written and what that. Because I do think you're right. I think to a certain extent it may have been a little easier. Although I don't know. How much more accepting is society of that?
Interesting. It would have been easier for Guinevere to handle it, but not Lancelot. I think.
And I think society would have. I think society handles the reverse better. Society handles the reverse much better.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
No.
Society would have had a hard time with if they had done the switch, if they had done it that way. But I'm talking the characters. The characters, if Guinevere was put in a man's body, she would have been able to handle being in a man's body better than Lancelot would have been able to handle his love is now in a man's body. Sure. And society, 100%, would have handles the Tristan and Isolde, the relationship better than they would handle two male. Flat out, society is better, handles things better if it's two women versus two men.
And still handles it poorly. Let's be clear. I'm not trying to make it sound like that's a cakewalk for anybody that's involved either, because no disrespect, it's not. You're right. I think society does handle one a little better than the other, and poor handling is poor handling any way you cut it.
Yes.
You mentioned Guinevere, something about Guinevere here, and I actually think it's important we address this piece. I really liked the writing of Guinevere. I liked the reincarnation into this officer's body, where she's got mad skills, and she's a strong character. She's not like some background character. She brings a lot to the table, from strategic planning, from like when a situation falls apart, she is part of the solution, an active part of the solution. She will call in the cavalry and actually organize strikes and plans to help keep moving everything forward. She's an active participant in all this. And I really liked that because to me, if you're wondering, like, what is the attraction? What is King Arthur's attraction to her? What is Lancelot's attraction to her? Why would people flock to her? It's that. I think there's that piece. Yet she kind of has that Wonder Woman quality of compassion too, because with Tristan that all goes down, and she could have really gotten in Tristan's face as that was going on, talking about some of the issues she has coming back, but she didn't. She like took all of that and knew when it was time to bob and weave, if that makes any sense at all. I thought she was a very well written character in this. Again, had her flaws too. That's one of the great things about Mike W. Barr's writing in this was the idea that these characters could be flawed, but they were strong enough that you could rally behind them. And there's the interesting balance there that's sometimes really hard to achieve, where what is too flawed? There comes a point where, okay, you've made this person like unlikable. They didn't do that at any point in time. And I think it was really important to have Arthur just as flawed as Lancelot and Guinevere in his own different, unique ways, because it made it easy to kind of like sit there and go, okay, well, am I going to root for Lancelot and Guinevere, or am I going to root for Arthur? And you could kind of see the reasons to question all of them and rally behind. Like, I liked all of them at the end of this. I really did. But there were times where I'm like, boy, Arthur, you really, out of everybody here, you really are out of time. Because he had some antiquated thinking that just could not be let go. It's funny, you mentioned the rise of Camelot. I think there is something to be said for the idea and the spirit of Camelot is not necessarily sustainable. It comes at a certain point in time where it like it's something you can get behind. It's something you can follow. It's a spirit that can get you over the hump of an event like this. But in the end, there isn't a like Camelot to follow it, if that makes any sense. It's like Camelot comes in, they do this, the spirit of Camelot helps you get through this big momentous battle. At the end, when everything fizzles, the idea and concept of it is enough of a spirit that like helps you build the next thing. Like, it was very clear at the end of this new Camelot was done. And whatever, even if they call it New Camelot afterwards, whatever comes after this is going to be something different. It will take elements of that spirit, sure, but it will also take a balance of other things that were not part of that and put them into that piece, because it is just not this sustainable concept. I loved that. It was such a cool way of encapsulating, I think, what the best Arthurian stories have, right? There was this romanticized movement of the King Arthur and the Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table and these glorious things that they did, and this quest for the Grail and all of that, and this big battle, and when it was done, something came afterwards. This has that same feel, and it totally just made me love the concept of Camelot and King Arthur in a whole new way. This really surprised me. I knew I was going to dig it just because of the title, and I was like, and the talent that was on there, I'm like, I'm going to dig this story. It's weird to say I didn't expect as much depth to this as I got, and I don't mean that as an insult to the creators in any way, shape, or form. I knew a 12-issue maxi series was going to have some serious content, especially coming from this era. But I didn't expect it to go as deep as it did. And you take a look at imprints like Vertigo, for example, right? Or a lot of the independent companies that are out there that are really taking stories like this today and doing this level of depth. Neil Gaiman's work, for example, where some of the area where he's gotten like really heady, and Alan Moore's stuff, you can't help but look back at this and go, this is the kind of work that is influencing a lot of the creators that we see today. And we take for granted that we get these kind of stories in comics. They were doing stuff like this back in the 80s, and it was cutting edge. It was like, wow, you can deliver this in comics? And that's why I really feel like this story could be released today, as is, as a brand new story. And people would eat this up as being, relevant today. Because it held up. I felt this held up extremely well.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, that I'm glad you said about where you were a little bit surprised on the depth. Because the one thing that kind of surprised me was, with all the different stories I've seen, read, and whatnot, a new Camelot story for me isn't anything I'm like, oh, okay, I'll probably enjoy it because I like Camelot. But yeah. I was very surprised by how much this pulled me into this universe. And as you said, I would 100% read a Tristan follow-up. So I would love that. I would read a Tom story follow-up. I would love to see where those two characters go. I would love to see Camelot 3001, where we see the next year, what happens with all these characters after all these events happened. It's one of those things I was like, man, that's the thing that caught me off guard by how much I enjoyed this, how much it pulled me and got me thinking off page. Because I started creating little side stories on all these different characters, and it's one of those neat things that this story really did catch me off guard. And again, we got a phenomenal creative team on this book, so I'm like, I shouldn't be surprised, but it really did catch me off guard that how much I enjoyed this and how much I want to own a physical copy of this. I'm reading this through DC Infinite app. So I read this great story, and I'm not paying anything extra other than what I already paid for my subscription to the service. So I'm like, for me, I'm like, man, this is a huge win. Now I got to get this in a version and have it, for my office and for my home, and I can read it later on, or just jump into the book reading it now. It's one of those neat things that this really caught me off guard and surprised me in a very wonderful way. And again, it even got me wanting to, see some of my favorite stories, maybe read, see what else is out there on the Arthurians front, because, it's one of those things when the movies come out, I always see them. It's something I'm always going to see, I always catch them, even the more comedic ones. There was the one where it was the kid version of the story, and all that. And I was like, okay, I watched it. It was still kind of neat because they had some cool moments, and there's some cool true Arthurian moments. And I was like, yeah, all right. The kids in this private school are rising up, and they're like, yeah, they're the Knights of the Round Table now. And it was a neat story. So, but this really has inspired me to actually read and watch some more of the, go back and finding what else we got out there. So this story did a really great job of reinvigorating my love of something I already enjoy.
As we jump into Chapter 7, I'm looking at the cover where Arthur's kind of banishing Lancelot and Guinevere. We all saw this coming, right?
Yeah.
This idea of the betrayal that was going to be coming down the line, and you see what's going on as Arthur's heading in to check on, basically after the battle, his knights, who have been beat up pretty badly. And I got to say, boy, do these knights take some battle damage in this story. It's one of those things where you really get a sense for their nobility. And it doesn't glorify battle or war or things like that, because they really are constantly fighting. I also like this idea when we talk about the reincarnation of these characters. You mentioned it with Tristan before, and I think we see it here with Lancelot. They haven't dropped the life that they led up till this point. It's still integrated into this new person that is a marriage of who they were before, meaning before they recognized that they were reincarnation, and their life that they lived as part of the Arthurian legend. So we see Lancelot very comfortable using technology to kind of improve the situation, enhance what they're doing, and educating Arthur along the way because Arthur is a strategist. Arthur's a master of battle. So when you speak in battle tactics and you speak in tools that can be used for that Arthur's at home as long as you put it in, a common frame of reference that he understands. And I really liked how the story highlighted that Arthur's not a dolt because he's in this time. Boy, does he pick up on things pretty quickly, though.
Yeah. Well, and again, is neat. He picks up on, and I think I liked, he picked up on the weaponry sooner and more easily than other stuff. Because again, he is that knight, he is that warrior. And you think back to the first issue when he picks up that gun, sees how it's worked, and he has no problem using that gun. But stuff like the refinery and the smelting and that, he's like, wow. And even like the medicine, he's like, whoa, this is it's shocking to him. Yeah. And I really dig I like how they're keeping him the stuff he should very easily pick up and be more comfortable with. He is, whereas the other stuff he's like, I don't know how this is going, and it's I like that. And the thing, this sequence with him and Lancelot, I'll tell you, the thing I missed on my first read through, I missed it on even I missed it until I did my art read through, was Guinevere passing him the note.
Oh, you didn't see that, really?
Not until my art read through. The first read through, because I'll tell you exactly what I was doing. I was more focused on Arthur's face. The grimace on his face, I didn't see the little note in her finger.
So not even on the next page you didn't catch
Well, that I did.
Okay.
And I see him reading the note. I'm like, what? Okay. And I'm like, okay, what's going on there? And I just didn't know exactly what was going on until later. I'm like, oh, okay. And then when I did the art read through, that's when I saw them passing the note. I'm like, oh, man, how did I miss that? That is awesome.
The Tristan story and Tom and what's going on there. Tom's kind of a tragic character in this because you've got this guy who has been thrust into, he's lost his parents. I mean, that was the start of this whole thing. And then he was thrust into this world, clearly has a deep affection, maybe even a love for Tristan or Amber, however you want to look at it. And I think Tom's constant reference to Amber is more of this idea of trying to hold on to the fact that in his mind, Tristan has to be female. Tristan's story is not simple at all, because if you were to ask yourself to even try to identify what Tristan is, I don't know that, which is why I think it's a really contemporary concept. I don't know how easy it is to identify that. And I really loved the depth, the character that they put into Tristan in this, because it's really, when I say it's contemporary, they had no way of knowing that people would be still reading this story now, right? You read this now in light of everything going on today, oh my gosh, this story feels like it was being written for today.
Yeah. Well, in a way, Tristan is transgender.
Yes.
And technically a man trapped in a woman's body. That's what kind of the definition is. And I like how back when this was written, transgender really wasn't a big thing commented on. This, the outside people would see them as two women in, as a lesbian relationship. And I like how the parking attendant even makes the comment, I saw those two good lookers together. What a waste. That right there is a very common sentiment of the 80s. Whenever, and even any normal person, it's not just hateful people. They would see, two women together. They were like, oh, that's a waste. That was a very common statement and was considered not even bad.
It's jealousy. But here's the thing. It's really driven by jealousy.
Yeah.
Because you got this guy who's like, they should be looking at me. And that's really where it comes from, right? And I loved, you're right, it's such an 80s comment. And yet it's so fitting in this story where it was funny. You mentioned Tristan's potentially being transgender. And I'm not saying you were doing this. Even that, doesn't it feel like hard to really define like what's going on here? And I say that with respect to the complexity of it, because I don't know that you can really identify what Tristan is. And I get that you're not trying to do that. What I'm saying is that's what I love about the story is it's not so easy to like pin this down with labels. And I think that's some of what's being explored today is this idea of looking beyond labels, because every situation is different and unique, which I don't think is that crazy of a concept.
Yeah. Oh, no, I 100% agree with you. And I'm not trying to do a simple, and you were right, I'm not trying to do a simple label because it's not. And that's one of the things I love about this story, about this character, and about just everything, the three of them, how they playing this off. Because it isn't as simple as transgender, because it's, there is this, really beautiful complication in this. And that's something I absolutely love. And I wonder, again, this is the story, I wonder how it would be told differently in present time. And that's the thing where, because again, we still would have the same kind of reaction. Like today, even though it's a very 80s comment, that still is being said today, but it's more people look down on somebody saying that than actually would have accepted it back then. And the relationship between these two is more acceptable, in society, but it's still, you still run into those issues. Same-sex relationships still runs into a lot of issues. It's more acceptable. It's more, things are easier for them than it was, but there are still a lot of adversity, a lot of roadblocks that they're dealing with. And it's as I said, with the transgender community, things are getting better, but it's still a lot of issues. So this story, I would love to have, if someone could create this kind of story in present days with present day reactionaries, that for me would be absolutely brilliant, because, again, I love this story 100%. Love the fact of how they handled it in this context, but I do wonder how things would be different nowadays. How things would be different. And I think that's one of the things that runs through my head in these stories. But again, I love just how much they do. Again, this is another tragic love story. We have two people who 100% love each other, and the one just can't let go of the fact that they're in the wrong form. This is the love of their life. They have a chance to be with them together again, but they've just got to get past one little thing for them to be together. And I love how Izzy has gotten past it. She knows this is the love of her life. They're back together again. Mm-hmm. Let's be together. And I love that.
I think the interesting part about this is there's some underlying concept there of Tristan's fighting so much against the form that there is no potential path to even explore, well, can I learn to like this? Can I learn to accept who I am? And that's not to say to give up the fact that I'm Tristan the male in this body. It's more of we're so violently fighting against any form of acceptance of this because I'm Tristan the male, that only towards the end of this do you get this idea that there may be a path to peace for Tristan, and I hope that there is. Like, I root for Tristan by the end of this especially, and it shows that the love of, whether it's male or female, the love of another who's accepting you for who you are, who you were, and who you are, if that makes any sense. I think Isolde totally loves Tristan for who Tristan is, not just outward appearance. It's everything, the whole package. And I think it's an interesting sort of piece that you see that there's a doorway, that there's a potential possibility for Tristan to somehow learn to become something new. Whatever that path is for Tristan in this process. It was really heady. And I say that in like the coolest way, where like only a comic can do this, where they give you this like 12-issue story that like explores this character in this crazy, because this sequence with Tom and Tristan, I think, is just so well written and so human. Where Tom puts his arm there and there is an innocence to what Tom's doing, but Tristan's right. Tom wants Tristan to be Amber. And you referenced it earlier as Amber. Tom sees the outside shell. I do think Tom sees the internal person too, but it's really from the outside in. Whereas Isolde, I would make an argument, sees from the inside out.
Yes.
And I think Tom really does care. And I think that's genuine. And it's not surface to the exterior, but I think in Tristan's end, it's like, I need somebody to see me inside because I do not like outside at all. So if you're seeing me from the outside in, you're definitely coming at me from the wrong angle. And I think that's what Tristan's saying to Tom here, and so much more. And Tom is not hearing it. And I don't know. I think by the end of it, Tom kind of gets there too, sort of. there's that bit where, and I don't want to ignore this when it comes up. Tom tears off the message from Tristan to Isolde, and burns it, and never reveals it. Like, I thought that was an interesting point in the story where Tom accepts the two of them going off together, but never reveals the deception. And I thought that was an interesting human moment there, too, where, you know, Tom had plenty of opportunities to say, listen, hey, I screwed up. I just wanted to let you know this is what happened. That never happened.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting choice to, like, leave that dangling there. And Tom, who I rooted for throughout this entire story, and I did right through the end, you see Tom have a very human moment, and you're like, you get why Tom did what Tom did, and you also get why Tom didn't reveal it. I wanted Tom to.
Yeah.
And as a friend, I'd be like counseling Tom, like, why didn't you? You had like a doorway there to reveal it, to like be the better person, and you didn't take it. But I actually liked the storytelling choice to leave that there. Because again, it showed that everybody in this is human. They all, like,
there's no their flaws.
There's nobody Lily White in this. Now we got Morgan, and boy, I did not see where. Did you see him being Mordred? Did you see that? Did you really all along?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
He was one of the other reasons I wanted to continue reading. Because I'm like, he's got to be.
That's cool.
He's got to be. And that was, you know, the Tristan story, what happened with Tristan and what happened with him were the two main reasons I had to keep reading.
Yeah.
Because going on, I'm like, because when they started revealing still more people, I'm like, he's got to be. You know, for a period, I was thinking maybe it could have been the U.S. president. But I was like, you know what? He's more of, you know, just the way the smartiness of the character and why Morgan Le Fay was bringing him in and trusting him and, you know, making him part of the thing. Like, that's got to be him. That's got to be him, man.
Well, trusting him, but not.
Right.
And that does add fuel to it.
She doesn't trust anybody.
Well, but about the history of Mordred.
Yeah.
You wouldn't trust him. So, I mean, I totally get the way that there's an advantage to having Mordred there and what you need from Mordred, but she never fully trusts him, and she's smart not to, because the second that he knows who he is, he's just as deceptive as he was beforehand.
Yeah.
So I totally get it, and that was a well done reveal. I could read a whole book on space Camelot, where you see like Arthur, like it dawns on me that this is the same King Arthur from the classic Knights of the Round Table times. This dude's jumping out of spacecraft with the Knights of the Round Table, and he's leading the charge. Like he's done this for his entire life. And yet you don't, because I'm looking at that and I'm like, I should be questioning this. I should be criticizing this. It is so cool. And it's Arthur, so it's just kind of like, yeah, of course he's going to, because it's King Arthur. And for some reason, I give him a pass more than I would any other. Like, there's a lot of DC heroes that I would like be like, why is that guy jumping out like and leading the charge off of this? King Arthur, it works.
And here's the thing on this sequence that I absolutely loved about this. One, I love the artwork of them coming out, attack, and you see the full knights, and you see Guinevere there and everything. I love how they put in the comment, Lancelot's like, hey, the planes, the ships are on autopilot. So when we need them, they'll be back here. But the other, I loved Arthur having that moment of, on his face as he's jumping out. And even his comment, I do favor combat on the back of a horse, though. That, for me, was some great moments. I loved this page. Yeah, I absolutely love the attack. And I love that attention to detail. Again, Arthur, he's comfortable with, the combat. He's comfortable with that little flying belt. But he is flying. This is not a guy from our time or even from the future. He's not going to be used to this kind of stuff. And I'm glad they did take a moment to just have that. Now, he's still Arthur. He still, lays the smack down. So he's got to do that. So I was happy with that. But I did enjoy that sequence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was the right attention to detail as far as that goes. And you know that they talked about it beforehand and what it was going to be like. I mean, there was a plan to this whole thing. Percival and his amazing friends I think was like the coolest thing in the world, where Arthur's like getting ready to, fight them off and that type of thing. Percival comes in, punches one of them, and then stands up in front of them, and he's like ready to lead. And I loved seeing Percival have that moment where no matter what form he's in, there's a nobility to Percival, there's a leadership to Percival. And I love how the creatures that sees one of their own, they've all gone through the same process that Percival has. He's like a symbol for them of another way. And they all start following, and now we've got this larger army. And it was such a cool way to open this whole thing up in this assault. Because now you're dealing with a squad that Arthur has that's really respectable to go into this battle of overwhelming odds. And it was pretty important at this time to see that.
Well, yeah. And I did love the line, be careful how you treat people on your way up, because you'll meet them again on your way down. I love this sequence. I absolutely love the fact that, again, we have the nobility of Arthur freeing these monsters. And I did air quotes around the term monster, so nobody, these are people who are tragically, mutated, and they're seen as these horrific creatures. Well, they're not. They're not as, fluid mentally as they were, but they still have that same, honor. They still have that same character in them. And that's what Tristan is able to access and able to inspire in them. And they're able to follow. And then I even love how later on you see the other, the other slaves, for lack of term, who are there, who Arthur frees and rescues. And, and it just, you love seeing those moments where Arthur, rides in on the horse or flies in on the flying cart, but it's there for that noble purposes. That's what Camelot, that's what Arthur is. That's what a knight is. And I love how they go into that, in just the nature of what is a knight. It's not just, someone who can fight well with a sword. It's someone who uses their strength to protect the weak and to crush the wrong.
Yeah.
I love that. I always love those moments.
But to serve the right, because you get to see that other page where Arthur's like slashing through one of them. Yeah. And this idea, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about symbolism. And I think this battle is one of those things where that's where I said it's not sustainable. This is all going to be a great symbol, and it's going to be something that they talk about for many, many years. And then it'll drift into legend. But that legend will be something that carries them forth. And it's almost destined to be legend versus being how they're able to operate. And I loved that aspect of this, where I'm like, oh, wow, it's a really clever way of doing it. And it's funny how you've got this story of King Arthur versus aliens, and it just works because... you're taking something that really is swords and sorcery, in its legend concept, and grounded in, classic kings and knights and those type of battles. It already goes fantastical with that, but there's a line, right, where you're like, okay, what's too far? If you said in the past, like, let's add aliens to that story, I think you'd laugh at it, right? Like, no, don't do that. You're going to ruin it. It didn't. And that just shows the talent of these creators, where you can drop this into the future as long as you get the right things, solid in this. Yeah.
You have to have the base. Yeah. You have to have the correct base for this story. And they 100% have the correct base of Camelot's story. And this is one of those great stories that I'm so glad you said, hey, let's do this, because I'd never even heard of this before we started talking about during the story.
Well, selfishly, I've wanted to read this for years. So I'm like, this is a great opportunity for me to like bump this up my stack and read it. I also thought it would be really interesting to read, because we've done it with some things, but it's been very rare that we've been able to take something that's been a complete story like this from the past and go, especially the past where we were both alive. Because this came out, this is a story that's contemporary to us when we were kids. So being able to say that this is something we could have read if we had the budget during that time, and then look at it as, okay, an 80s story to today, how does it really hold up? I definitely would have been a top of the stack read monthly right now. If it was released right now, this would have been a top of the stack read.
Yeah.
Here's one of the things that they did really well in this. There comes a point where you're like, okay, what is too sexy for the story, right? You know what I mean? And to the point where it's gratuitous. You need an element, because here's what you got to believe. The passion between Lancelot and Guinevere, you have to, where he's like, okay, why is he unable to stick to this vow that he made to himself? She didn't make the same vow. She was sort of respecting his vow, but she's like, listen, we're in love. What are we doing? Like, and I liked this. I don't feel like in this story that, she's sitting here basically saying, I was dead and your love brought me back. Now you expect me to what? Just pretend like we're buddies? And her point was like really valid, where she's like coming at this from the standpoint of, listen, this is so far beyond. I mean, she's really saying it like in the subtext here. This is so far beyond us cheating. We love each other. What are we doing? Why are we denying ourselves this? We all know it. And then you know it was going to happen, right? Yeah. Arthur was waiting to pounce. That's where in this one I fault Arthur. Like, he knew this. Why would you marry her? Why would you do that? And Merlin suggesting it was so duplicitous. Yes. It's one of those where I love Arthur in this. I'm Team Arthur as far as king and all that kind of stuff. But this is an example of a jealous king who was reacting. Certainly, I wanted to say with his heart instead of his mind, and I would say neither of those. It's ego.
He's reacting with his pride.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Thank you.
And again, normally I get angry at Lancelot and Guinevere for the affair and for the betrayal and all that. With this one, I loved how they did it in that she's like, hey, and you even said it, your love brought me back. And I think that for me was a true statement of how deep these two love each other. And I always, fault Lancelot for having his moments of weakness. But I'll be honest with you, the woman you love with all your heart is standing completely naked in front of you. I understand why he went against this vow right there. And I loved how they did this sequence.
Yeah.
Because again, it was one of those things where it wasn't just a physical lust. It was a lust and a love and all of that, and just that fire and passion, coming together in a single moment. And I love that. And again, as you said, Arthur bursting through the wall, doing his Kool-Aid Man, impersonation, going through the wall.
Oh, yeah.
Really also, it's his pride.
Yeah.
And even after all this stuff, where, the next couple pages where no one can reach him, no one can get a hold of him, no one can get through to Arthur to get him to, start seeing things more clearly, how they need Lancelot, they need Guinevere. The world is going to end if we don't work together, but Arthur's pride won't, let him do that. And I love how just the fact that, that was the big, this great sequence in this. And I really do blame Arthur and Merlin on this. More Merlin than Arthur, because I think Merlin pushed it. Whereas in prior legends, I used to put the blame on Lancelot and Guinevere. I love how they did this.
But can't you do both? I mean, you look at because you have to, see, to me, I have to incorporate the legend into this. So you have to take a look at the legend and all that happened. You can go in the past and go, okay, who do you blame for all this? In some ways, like Arthur and Guinevere fell in love, in the past. And that love was genuine. And then Lancelot came on the scene, and that love was something that neither of them planned, but overtook both of them, and they made the choices they made. So we can really talk about the heavy morality of that in context of the past. But now they're reincarnated. What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
And he knew it was going to happen. So he saw it all playing out. So what does he say? Let's get married? Because Merlin says this is a good... Listen, it's not cheating yet because you're not married. Why don't you get married so that way it's cheating?
Yeah.
What?
Exactly. And the thing me being me, it cracked me up how he banishes them from New Camelot. Lancelot owns New Camelot, guys. Mm-hmm. That's his home. You can't kick him out.
Here's the thing, dude. It's good to be the king. Because apparently when you're the king, you can. Hey, buddy. Take your bags and get out of your home. Yep. This is my castle now. It does show their respect for him, though, right? Because that didn't even, to your point, that didn't even enter Lancelot's mind.
Yeah.
It's like, this is New Camelot. I put this together for the king. This is the king's castle. He's banishing me. I'm going to honor it. That does show his love and respect for Arthur. And it's funny, when you talk about the reincarnation, he is still Lancelot. And his love for Arthur is genuine, and he always references it. And he genuinely tried to push Guinevere away. You know, it's hard to... I blame all three of them in the scenario, and I blame Merlin. It's, there's enough blame to go around in this whole scenario. Yes. That's the tragedy of the whole thing. You get that, like, and Arthur references it with Tom at a certain point in time, where his relationship with his sons, his relationship with Lancelot, with Guinevere, with everything, his being the king has him focused so much more on kingly duties than even building a proper relationship with Guinevere, a proper brotherly friendship with Lancelot. Like, it's there, and the respect is there, but think of how much, if Arthur could find the right balance. And that's the tragedy of Arthur, because I think there's a way to do it. He just is destined to never be able to see it. And that's why when he's like, there's a sequence where he's like, he's so very tired. It's like, of course you are, because you are moving at a pace that isn't rational.
Yep.
And that's why you're destined to always be legend, because you do these things that are not sustainable, but will put a mark that people will never forget. That's the part that's so interesting. This ending sequence of this issue with Tristan and what's happening there, it was funny. I will admit, I didn't see Tristan actually turning. I saw Tristan agreeing, like what happened about betraying the Round Table. But at the end, I felt like Tristan was going to be tried and true. But it was so cool how it played out, because it teases enough where you're like, but would Tristan, like, is that obsession or is the trauma that Tristan's going through enough to cause that? It was enough of a doubt that it made for an interesting story tool.
Yeah, big time. I was in the same boat as you. I was thinking, agreeing to it, but at the last moment, won't portray the Round Table, because I was rooting for Tristan, to hold up to the knightly honor that they have, and I was hoping for that. And again, they did a brilliant job with just laying the doubt and putting all that, and just the storytelling elements of this, because you 100% could see why they would do this.
Yeah. These covers, I'm just looking at this other one for Chapter 8. These covers are outstanding. I mean,
here's something I noticed on my art read-through. Chapter 8 cover. Mm-hmm. Who's the one knight whose face we don't see?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Neat little teaser there, little, now that you know the rest of the story, you're like, oh, that is awesome.
I didn't notice that until you just said it now. Very cool.
Yeah. I noticed it on my art read-through, because I was looking through it, because initially I was looking for Guinevere. And I'm like, no, okay, it's just the knights, and I'm like, wait a minute. There's one knight who you can't see his face, because you can see Arthur's face in the reflection. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Brilliant on the cover. I wonder, again, I'm assuming that was intentional. I'm assuming.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would be a interesting little foreshadowing there. That's really well done. The odds on that being a coinkydink is pretty slim. I didn't notice it, though. You mentioned this in Morgan, and the fact that there's an attractiveness to Morgan, and there's an attractiveness to Tristan in this. And I think there's an importance to that in that scenario, because you can see why Tom's attracted to her, but you also see her as this strong warrior. And I think you've got to see that interesting balance between the two, because you get why Isolde's attracted, why Tom's attracted. You get what is going on here with Morgan, why people would be attracted to Morgan. And even though we see that growth on her back, the talisman idea and the idea that, this is the key, but in order for that door to be open, you need me. So I'm going to give you this and let you hold on to that little thread. But, you only get the whole package if you do what I need you to do. So here's the first little teaser. And it's a smart move. Boy, the manipulation is just a big part of this story. is for as much as there's physical battles, there's mental battles that go on in this particular tale, and it's a very heady tale on that end. Warfare occurs on all different fronts, right? And this kind of deception is really cool. Percival, overhearing all of this, I totally, the shadow of Sir Kay that's there,
Yeah.
I didn't notice that was Sir Kay. I noticed there was a shadow, and you knew that somebody was watching. If you look back at it, knowing that it's Sir Kay, oh my gosh, the shadow is his. I mean, it's so there. So before the reveal, I admit I did not see that was his shadow. I just saw that it was a shadow. You go back, the detail in the Brian Boland art, oh my gosh, that is absolutely 110% Sir Kay's shadow. And I loved how subtle that is. That it's worth going back and looking at it again to see the pieces were there. They were there on the cover, like you're saying. Yeah. There was a lead into this where he was revealing it, but doing it in such a cool way.
Well, and here's the thing. I remember when I first read through, before I knew everything going on, I was thinking that was Tom. Because we know Tom stalks outside Sir Tristan's room, and multiple times he's been out there listening in. So I was thinking that was Sir Tom. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so Tristan's going to have the moment when it's time to betrayal. Tom will step in and be there as that moral compass and help Tristan not betray the table. That's what I was going through my head. That's what I was thinking how this story would play out.
I love that we could sum up Tom like this. Yeah, Tom is this nice guy that entered into this crazy fighting world, and you got to give him a lot of credit because he became kind of a warrior at arms and this type of thing. But he's also a little creepy.
He's a little creepy. He's a guy stuck in the friend zone. And when you're stuck in the friend zone, you sometimes do a little creepy stuff.
Yeah.
You got to watch that you don't go into full creep mode. Because once you cross into full creep mode, then it's restraining order time.
Right.
And it's,
Tom skirts that line.
Good. He's not in restraining order. He's not in full creep mode, but there is a little bit of a creep factor with him.
Wait, he's on that train, though.
Yeah.
I'm glad that they give certain time to some of the other knights, because there's some of the knights are kind of background characters in this, and it's important to give you updates because I care about, we've got one that's got a family, we've got one that's got this debt of honor, and it's really important as you're going through this story to continue those dangling threads that were put early on. And I'm giving a lot of credit for the balance of this, that they don't ever leave us hanging on anything with that. We continue on with those stories. Obviously, you want to go back to the main players pretty quickly, like Guinevere and Lancelot, like they do. And you kind of want to know, where are they staying now?
He is a multi-billionaire, trillionaire. So
correct.
He's got multiple houses. And again, they went back to the first issue when they first had the initial refugees. He was offering up his own personal housing for them. That's when he went to what became New Camelot. He went to his estate, which became New Camelot. So he's got multiple places to stay. But again, it was neat that they do touch on, Gawain and Galahad, and then go back into Lancelot and Guinevere.
Yep.
Those are the things they do touch into that. And I'm glad they didn't let go of those characters, because those two could very easily been lost in the shuffle. They're keeping them going.
Now, Swiftly, my Judas Knight, she refers to, why? It's interesting, the ego of Morgan. You would think at this point in time that you would, keep the manipulation going. Instead, Morgan's I've given you this now. You're completely wrapped around my finger. It's almost the mistake that Morgan makes, because I can't help but wonder if Morgan's approach was different, just playing devil's advocate. If you kept playing off of sympathy for what Tristan's going through, if Morgan might not have been able to accomplish more with Tristan. You know what I mean? Being the one sympathetic ear. You could have really manipulated this situation a lot more. The doorway was open, hey, listen, I'm giving you that talisman because, you may hate me, but I get it. And I'm sorry for what you're going through, and I'm going to just convince you that, at the end, my goal is this. I want you to have back what you want. Instead, the Judas Knight piece, it's almost like you're throwing salt on the wound of betrayal.
Yeah.
And almost make you're setting up Tristan to question what Tristan's doing. You know what I mean? And that's the ego of Morgan. I'm not questioning what the writers were doing here. I think the writers wrote this brilliantly because I think lines like that are pretty critical because ego in this story is a big factor for a lot of characters on both sides of the fence. Arthur, we talked about it earlier before, pride and ego and those type of things. You're seeing pride and ego play out too with his half-sister.
Yeah.
So it's clearly a family trait.
Yep.
The Merlin story and the trap for Merlin was something that was like, how do you take Merlin off the table? And you have to, because this is a big weapon that Arthur has at his disposal and something that he relies on heavily. So you take Merlin off the table now, and you've now really taken a major weapon that Arthur has. There's some pros and cons to taking Merlin off the table, because there's sometimes where you don't want Merlin's voice in Arthur's ear.
Yeah.
Because I do like that this does not end Arthur's effectiveness. It just means that he has to shift gears. We do still see a king. In some tales of Arthurian legend, I think there was almost too much reliance on Merlin. My favorite stories of King Arthur or Merlin are one where you showcase Arthur's effectiveness. Like, why is he this king that you put on this pedestal? Well, this story, I think, does a really good job of showing that, yeah, we've taken away a major piece of his arsenal, but that does not incapacitate him. He is able to shift. He's able to bob and weave. That part was really, really interesting. The Excalibur being used in the way that it was. And I love that this was all a ruse.
Yeah.
Excalibur really can't do this. He basically implies to everybody that Excalibur's a lie detector.
Yes, and would strike them dead if you were to ever utter a lie while holding it. And because, again, I love that. Because, again, you think back to Arthur. He always holds the sword. He always has the sword, so he must always tell the truth. And it would do that. And it would be believable on how they're looking at him. And I thought this was an absolute brilliant sequence, because I'm going through this and I'm thinking, I don't ever remember reading that Excalibur is this great lie detector. Right. What's going on here? And it wasn't. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
But he literally swerved all of them into thinking, like, listen, you're going to die. And every one of them are like sitting there, like revealing their secrets and publicly saying everything. And the great part about this was you got to question, like, did Arthur know all along it was Sir Kay? Because
I think he suspected.
Because I think he saved him for last almost on purpose.
Yeah, I think Arthur suspected it was Sir Kay. Because you go back to earlier, either in this issue or the prior one, where he's like, everyone's betrayed me but you. And he does look at Sir Kay as, as that right hand. But when everything happened, first, of course, he says, Tom, I know it's not you. You're fine. It doesn't even make Tom grab the sword. But he does go through it. Kay's the last one. So I do think he does suspect Kay.
Right. And you think he'd go through everybody, right, just to eliminate it. But it's so awesome. Such a cool sequence of events. And Tom, like, being the one to tackle Kay. Like, Tom's all in. Like, Tom is Team Arthur, tried and true throughout this whole process. And has been since the beginning. He's been Arthur's running buddy. And, boy, what a great tool he was in this story, right? As being kind of us. Like, our gateway where you could see, like, oh, I could be Tom. That was, I think, an important part of this story. I was glad. At one point in time, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if the Isolde thing is a ruse and Tom's actually Isolde.
Oh, that would have been awesome.
There was one point in time where I thought maybe that was like a swerve that Morgan was doing that to manipulate Tristan.
Right.
And Tom was actually the real Isolde and didn't know it. I actually prefer the way that they did it.
Yes.
Because to me it added a far greater and much more real story with Tristan that I think really leaves you at the end with a dangling thread that you're left to really ponder and think about what the future for those characters would be. And I think that was a far more intelligent and satisfying story that I think lives. I think it's one of the reasons why I think this story is so contemporary today. So I would not have changed it. But we both talk about in episodes how we do our own speculation, and I was like wondering, I'm like, what if? And it wasn't like I was totally sold on the idea, but it was one of those things where I'm like, well, I don't know what direction they're going to go in with this. What if they did that? I was like, that's kind of cool.
And I'll be honest with you, that never popped in my head. And I like the idea. I think that would have been a really cool swerve if this whole thing would have been a Morgan betrayal. But to be honest, like you said, I so love how this story goes. I so love the way they're dealing with this that I wouldn't want that.
Right.
But that is a cool story and a cool twist, you know?
How many times do we speculate about things where we're like, that sounds cool at the time, but then what they actually do is so much cooler?
Yes.
What they actually did was way cooler. So I wasn't saying it in the sense that I wanted that idea to happen. It was more me speculating early on, where do I think this might go? And I loved how this story ended up playing out. The whole Sir Kay piece and what was going on there, and the fact that he was ready to, really was ready to kill Sir Kay. It's time. You got to serve your sentence. And if it wasn't for the battle starting, Sir Kay was really done for.
Yes. And it's one of those things where I crack up laughing going, Morgan Le Fay messed up. She should have held off. She's watching them the whole time.
Yep.
She should have hold off, wait till he kills the guy, and then attack. So here's the one piece of strategery that I think she messed up on.
Yeah.
Right here. She should have held off. And again, I like how she used get rid of Merlin so they don't see the attack coming and then attack. I'm all for that. But she's watching him get ready to execute one of the knights. And here's the thing. After killing one of the knights, they would have even been more emotionally down. And they wouldn't have been able to repel the fight. This whole thing was completely disheartening for all of them. And it was a neat thing that I liked how they played this off. And again, I'm happy with how the story ended up, but there is little stuff like that. I'm like, oh, come on, Morgan, you could have done better. And the other thing that I thought was a neat choice, you go to the scene where Arthur sentences Kay to death. They're all in their regular street clothes. When it's time to actually perform it, they're all knighted up.
Yep.
Everybody but Kay. Kay's the only one who's still in his street clothes. But even Tom is in his night clothes. All of them are all armored up, and again, it's that process.
Right.
You would put on your knightly gear. You would do that. And they're all...
But Kay would not...
Lancelot is against it. He's still backing the king's orders.
But Kay would not because of the fact that he's the one that's shamed. And I actually liked the distinction, too. So I think your point about him still being in street clothes makes a ton of sense. Because he's no longer worthy of being a Knight of the Round Table because of his betrayal. It's an interesting sort of piece. Kay's sacrifice not only saved Arthur, but it really saved Tom as well in its own way. Because even though Tom did take a hit, his hit would have been far worse if Kay had not been in the way.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is a great fight sequence. One of the things about the series, just their combat, just their battle, and just the chaos of the battlefield.
Yeah.
I've often said just the beautiful chaos that is battle. This book really did a great job capturing it. And we're dealing with, swords and lasers and energy weapons and big giant creatures who can throw large boulders through ships. But not only does he throw the boulder through the ship, you see the alien flying out. Oh, and they got the little shee as it's dying. I'm like, oh, that is brilliant, man.
Brian Boland is an incredible talent.
Yes.
And it's something that needs to be, that's kind of no kidding. But it's great to see Brian Boland on something like this. And, honestly, the story I most identify Brian Boland with, and it's just because I've read it so many times, and in no way, shape, or form is meant to diminish the wealth of talent or the wealth of work that Brian Boland's been on. But Killing Joke was a story I've read 7 billion times. So when I think Brian Boland, it literally is the first story that I go to. To see him on something like this, fresh, where I did not read this back in the 80s. So for me, this is new Brian Boland art. And being able to see he deals with these really deep emotional sequences. He deals with these great battle sequences. And they're all flawless. Really, it's just he's a master storyteller. And that was something that really shined through in this. The Holy Grail piece was something that was once that came on the table, she's got to shift gears. Because she's like, hey, this is a game changer. Taking them out right now doesn't do us any good. if he knows where the Grail is, I'm going to be cured. And Mordred has a reason to want an advantage of this. Doesn't know it yet, but has a reason to want the advantage of this beyond everything else. It was super cool.
Yeah. Oh, big time. And I'll tell you, I loved, again, it shows Mordred, Morgan Le Fay being as smart as she is. She calls off the attack once she realizes the Grail. And again, she wasn't so blinded by her rage against Arthur to destroy him. Like, whoa. If he can get the Grail, if he can get his hands on the Grail, I can get the Grail and I can cure myself. And just, again, it was just brilliant usage of that. And then that was something I didn't think of, the quest for the Grail would be brought into this. And I love that. Again, it's a classic part of the Arthurian legend, so I'm so glad they pulled the Grail in, and they pulled it in for this reason. They've got to save Sir Thomas, Knight of the Round Table. And I love just that whole notion of this is the only way we can save our brother now. Tom is now one of them. He is now a Knight of the Round Table.
Yep.
And I thought that for me was just a great moment of he showed his sacrifice, he showed his honor, he's shown everything. He showed that he's worthy of the knighthood. And I thought that for me was a really great moment.
I did like the reveal. We talked about it already. The reveal at the end with Lancelot and how the two of them were talking, and that was the only time that Arthur revealed the fact that Excalibur didn't work that way. Yeah. Kay didn't know that. But it's another tragedy because the fact it would be useful if it could do what Arthur was saying it would. Percival on the cover of Chapter 9 and the Holy Grail, I thought was a really great, just eye-popping cover. The covers off of this really took advantage of, I think, a nice balance of being this futuristic thing with this Arthurian lore. The Holy Grail as a concept in the Arthurian story, I thought was something that I just always loved being explored.
Oh, God, yeah. And it's funny, with me, up until the one Indiana Jones movie, I always had the image of this classic image of the Holy Grail in my head, but that Indiana Jones movie completely changed what I thought the Grail would look like, And it's funny. I love how they did this. And this is the classic image of it, so sure. I'm not knocking it. But that is, in the Indiana Jones, they did a good job of what the Grail should look like. I was like, that is neat.
Now, as we're continuing on, and well, here's the thing. As we've seen in this, the Grail itself can take on different forms.
True.
And a lot of things have taken on different forms. Even the talismans that lead you to the Grail can take on different forms. Faith plays a big part in this story. When you start taking a look at things like the Holy Grail, there's a frustration because Arthur and Lancelot really can't do anything. They've got to, hope that Percival's able to tap into his visions, being able to follow through on where the location potentially is. The encounter with Tom and Tom's weakness. I mean, he's horribly burnt and he's dying and he knows he's dying and he's scared. And his reaction, I love the innocence of, I wish I hadn't, and then he's like, I'm sorry. I don't mean that. I'm just, and Arthur just being compassionate, understanding, it's, we're going to find the Holy Grail. We're going to find a cure. Imagine having to rely on that, where you're like sitting here like, listen, I've been following you a long time, but now you're going to tell me the Holy Grail's real and like we're going to be able to. And Arthur telling the whole story and saying, listen, I've got to believe in this. There was a couple appearances of this thing showing up. I believe we can, Joseph of Arimathea and all. I loved the history and the lore being brought into this. This story did a really great job of bringing in parts of religion that were a part of this, and in a way that I thought was really compelling for the story. They went out of their way to be all-encompassing on something. When you see Mike W. Barr talk about the fact that I'm not an Arthurian legend scholar in the beginning of this, he sure fooled me because he really tapped into a lot of what I think are the interesting and important ideas in Arthurian legend, and then took them to, the next logical step. And I thought that was a really cool part of this.
And I'll tell you, I loved how, as I said before, I was surprised that they're going after the Grail.
Yeah.
Even though it is such a huge part of the legend, I was just assuming they were going to not go that route. They were just going to continue on with the fall of Camelot, this and that, and the love story version of it.
Sure.
And I loved how they pulled us in. I loved how they told everybody they spent like, a full, couple pages on the Grail, on what it is, why it has these abilities to heal, Tom. Why, what is so significant about the Grail? And I love the fact that they did that, to actually, again, because there's a lot of people who won't know what the Grail is, who won't know anything about the Grail. So this was a brilliant way to do that. Again, a couple pages, didn't take too long on it, and again, they tied it into the story, into the further story, because Arthur is saying this to Tom to calm him down, to make him feel understanding. And again, this is the moments where you really see Arthur as a king. And I love that he, first off, he completely understood why Tom, didn't mean, what he said. He's like, hey, I'm okay, I understand. And then he goes beyond that, where he's telling Tom this story to calm him down, to let it so he'll be able to rest. And I thought that for me was just a great, significance of the storytelling, but also the coolness of Arthur, and again, why he is this king they are all blindly following. They are 100%, they are full on, there is no betrayal in that light of Arthur. And I think that is awesome.
Yeah. This story was real interesting with the Merlin piece, too. I love that Merlin's last cry. I like that it was Tristan that's handing out these talismans.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Tristan's still loyal. And even though it's a struggle to be loyal, because Tristan's obviously, there's a gamble to this loyalty of, I may be trapped like this. And I'm torn over that. But I'm still me. I'm still Tristan. And that's the funny part with Tristan. We all see it where, yes, I get it. I get why you're so frustrated with the position that you're currently in, but you're still you. And we get to see that play out in this in a way that I think is just so satisfying to this story. And I enjoyed the character arc here. Seeing Morgan's reaction to that fool, even in imprisonment, he's found a way to thwart me. And there's such a great piece. This leads to the reveal of Mordred and Mordred's story. And that was one of the cool things that this tale did, because I mentioned it early on in the last episode, that this story gives you everything that you need. So even if you're not a hobbyist of Arthurian legend, it tells you the right story beats. So that way, these are the pieces that you need to know to understand what was happening here and why Mordred's so bitter. Arthur tried to kill Mordred. And I mean, it was, and just almost succeeded in killing Mordred. And even the stuff that was going on, Tristan was not the greatest of fellows back in those days. I mean, the way that Tristan was with, it was what, Mordred's mother?
Well, not the mother, the peasant. The mother was the queen.
Right.
The queen gave the baby to a peasant, and then that's who Tristan did his thing with. But now, here's the thing. I'm trying to remember if all of this was a fabrication and not actually what really happened. This is what Mordred thought, but not actually the occurrence. And I can't remember if this is everything that we're reading is 100% true, or if this was a complete fabrication that is done to play mind games if this is a Morgan Le Fay mind game on Mordred. I don't remember which it is.
Well, here's the thing. This story never clears that up.
Right.
So it's an interesting sort of tale one way or another. And I think there's a lot of this that could be, you could sit there and say is suspect, but that's kind of Arthurian legend anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the peasant, I guess I was taking the peasant when I said mother, and I got to be clear off of that. Adoptive mother, or was, right. I mean, I guess that's where I was going with it. I didn't mean birth mother, and I should be clear on that. But I think you're right. There's so much of Arthurian legend, though, that think about how many different tales there are of Arthurian legend depending on time placement of it, right? Because I think, probably like me, you've read some Arthurian stories that take place at different timelines, because that's been kind of the thing with Arthur. Did it take place here in history or here in history? Right. And that change has serious modifications to the story of Arthur, depending on when it takes place, actually. And that's something that I think has been interesting. That Robin Hood has the same thing. I've read stories of Robin Hood. There was an author named Park Godwin, and I'm probably butchering his name, who did some stories recently of both King Arthur and of Robin Hood recently. I'm going back, when I'm in my in my 20s. That's not recently.
That's not recently anymore.
Yeah, right.
No.
It's kind of, yeah. I'd like to think it was recently. But really good books. And he did an exploration of Robin Hood and King Arthur, and they were both written to very specific time frames. That alteration to the story, I mean, in the historical time frames, but he was pinning them down and then writing the legends according to the time frame they took place in. And the alterations that it did make to the story because of the time frame that was chosen, and they're ones that out of history, these stories could have and may very well have taken place here. I think that's one of the things with the Arthurian legend. We've seen it told in different ways depending on that. Yeah. And I really enjoy that malleability of it. I'd love to know, it'd be great at some point in time to get pinned down to how much of Arthur's story is true. Like, I mean, it came from certain things. Like, was Arthur a single person? Who was he? What was, how did the legend transform into what we know it to be now? It's an interesting sort of piece. And I haven't done a lot of research on that, and I'd like to. This story actually has me jonesing to read a little bit more about Arthurian legend and where its roots. I mean, I know some. I'm not going to pretend I'm a master of the roots of it. I've read more of the stories, and I've watched more of the stories than I've looked into the backgrounds of it. And it's funny how a story like this with its depth makes you kind of go, I kind of know a little bit more now about how much of this came from some elements of truth.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of different stuff out there, like the real King Arthur, and those explorations. Did he actually exist? And those are some neat stories. I've seen some of those. Those of all the stuff I've seen have been like TV specials.
Me too.
In search of, and those kind of things where it's an exploration as to could this have actually been this person, or and there's a couple where they have him listed up in Scotland, where he's not English, he's Scottish and stuff like that, and others were like, oh no, it's based on this king over here, and he was not a king but like a tribal chieftain uniting these tribes together, and that's the person that became it was the birth of the legend. And I've seen a couple of those things, and I thought those are kind of neat ones, and those are the kind of the story versions of the Arthurian legend that I really enjoy.
Me too.
Because again, it's a different take on it. I love the classic take on it, and you just the overall, like the Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers. When they play that, you've got your Knights of the Round Table, the rise, the fall, the fight for the right, not for fight for might. There's all this. When you have a classic story like Three Musketeers, it's again, I keep saying classic over again, but that's what it is. These are the basis of these stories, but they will tweak it and modify it, and you can see it, and you're like, oh, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. It's not an original idea, but it's an original take on the idea, an original, variance on it, original, swerve, or, some little bit here and there. And that's one of the things that this story has 100% really done for me. Because, as I said, I don't know if all this actually happened or if this was fabrication, but I'm okay with it either way. If Arthur actually did do this stuff, and Kay and Tristan did all this stuff, we already talked about how they're not perfect people. And back then, especially, they were making these mistakes. Now, I 100% don't think Arthur was drowning babies. That's why I'm like, I really do think this is a Morgan Le Fay kind of manipulation. But I don't know for certain.
You also got to remember, too, it's a different time. So what was commonplace or even acceptable acceptable is a strong word, but it really is kind of tricky what was really going on at that time. I love that part of this story where you kind of look at it and go, could they have done that back in that time? And I think you're right. This is a story that's been passed down from generation to generation. So how much of what Mordred was told was manipulation, I don't think we'll ever know. And I liked that part.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Definitely. And again, this is, This is a combination of Mordred being Mordred, combination of Morgan Le Fay being Morgan Le Fay, and it's absolutely brilliant. These two working together. It's this is, again, as you said, this is the Arthurian legend coming to a modern age, and then Arthur dividing up the forces, which I normally don't like, but with this one, it makes sense. They need to do this. They need Alpha Team going after one objective, Bravo Team going after another objective. 100%. I like the teaming up that they did. The fact that it is, Lancelot and Guinevere have to be on that same team. Taking Tom, and getting, to go get to the Grail. One, Arthur can't work with those two people. Two, those two work well together, and he needs his other knights dealing. Arthur needs to be on one mindset, one page. And I think that, for me, was a really cool divide of the team.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought the divide of the team made sense, and what they were trying to do, I think, was a really good piece. It also showed the wounds that Arthur's still dealing with. I think from an ego standpoint, and I think we all have this, right? I think he hoped that Guinevere would choose him and would not have gone this route with Lancelot again.
Right.
And you clearly see the humanity of Arthur there. And that's why, even with the drowning the babies thing, it's a reminder of Arthur came from a different time. And it's not a justification of anything that Arthur may have done during that time. It's in that era, could they have done this? Unfortunately, yeah. That's where it gets kind of creepy. Because you can sit there and go, okay, well, I'm kind of following him as the hero of the story, but he wasn't always this great, nice guy. And that era also was one, as far as for our concepts of morality, right? Not this great like we talk about the romance of Camelot, right? But that era in and of itself, and its rules of what you do for betrayal and things like, death when there's betrayal. And, I think there's a strong question as far as should Sir Kay have been sentenced to death for what he did? It just wasn't always this really great, nice era, if that makes any sense. And I thought that was something that's true in the story. I think that needs to be a true part of that story. I like that they didn't romanticize it, if that makes any sense at all.
Right.
Because you could have easily gone the route of like, well, we kind of want to sugarcoat that because.
And you don't want to. They could have very easily gone with, not even including it in the story, But again, it gave a great motivation on the villain in what's going on and why he perceives Arthur as this must die kind of entity, whereas everybody else is like, no, Arthur's a cool guy. Well, here's why Margaret doesn't think that. Right. In that whole sequence with Tom and Tristan, we get to see this other moment where Tom is like, do you want to come with me? One of those moments with Tristan. Tristan actually shows this great moment of kindness or frustration where Tristan's like, I get why you want me to come with you, but, and if I was a female and accepted it, this would be a great honor, or, I'd be flattered and that type of thing. Yeah. But I really liked that, there was that honesty. And then speaking of honesty, you get to see Arthur talk about the weight of the crown and the decisions that have to go with it, and how he looks at Tom like a son. Tom lost his family, and Arthur is one where you've shown me this loyalty and you've been this person that I can mentor. And I thought that was something that was really, really interesting to see between their relationship, that like, oh, wow, Arthur is having this like rare moment where he's letting down his guard and letting Tom know that like, hey, there's, I feel something for you here in this scenario, and it's familial, and I appreciate your loyalty, and what an honor that is. And you get why there's a compelling part to, I guess, to Arthur and to following him in those moments where you get to see his humanity. I really enjoyed that whole thing about this story. I just thought it was pretty cool. So what did you think of as they started to split up, we had the whole sequence with the Grail and Percival and what ended up happening, Percival's journey. Because we get to see Percival go through this sequence of events where Percival finds the Grail, and Percival's ancestor has been guarding the Grail. How
there's like this almost like childlike need for that, the obvious symbols aren't the ones that you're going to be looking for, but you need to be almost innocent, childlike. And Percival kind of comes off as having, I'm not even talking about Percival in this form. Percival's kind of this romantic, I don't want to say child, but has an innocence, if that makes any sense, in how they're portraying him in this story. But when you become the guard of the Grail, you kind of give up your life for that purpose, and that torch had to be passed from Percival then on to Lancelot. What did you think of that whole journey? I didn't see it going there. I actually thought this might be the thing that's going to separate Lancelot and Guinevere, where Lancelot being the guardian of the Grail was going to, make him have to make the choice of the Grail over Guinevere.
Yeah.
And I was glad they didn't go that way, because I actually much preferred what they did. But I thought, I don't know if you thought that, but I potentially thought that might be where this is going.
Oh, actually, I did think that, because again, with the initial selection, and I really did like the fact that why it was Percival and why everything going through, and then he had to choose the one symbol.
Yeah.
And it's not the crucifix because he's not on the cross anymore. It was the square which folds down into the cross. And that was the Grail. And I thought that for me was a really neat idea. And then, again, it was everything where it fixes, fixes reverse Percival back down to his natural form. And then it's time for him to leave. And Percival is now at peace and he is done. And that's the part that surprised me. And I was like, whoa, they're getting rid of Percival. Okay. But once Lancelot was made the guardian of the Grail, I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting, because what happens? The Guardian's always the guardian of the Grail. And also in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so New Camelot will be the guardian of the Grail, and thinking different thoughts, and maybe Guinevere can't be with him now, or there's again, multiple stories were running through my head. Again, having them lose the Grail, was a oops, that's going to be an issue for them. But again, this was a great story element. Because you get this epic moment of Percival being cured of the Neo-Man syndrome and being back to himself. And then he's like, okay, guys, peace, I'm out of here. And then he's gone. He transcends, and Percival is now off the equation. So now we've got the rest of this team dealing with the Grail is now missing. They captured the Grail, but now the Grail's gone. So they cured Tom, so he's good to go, but now the bad guys have the Grail. So again, it was a really neat add-on, and I didn't know where they were going to go with this. I assumed they were going to jump in another rocket ship and fly to Morgan's castle, but it was a neat story how this all began a whole nother spin on the legend, a whole nother part of the legend. I was like, this is awesome.
And Lancelot made a lot of sense, because there is a certain nobility to Lancelot, which is an interesting sort of piece with him that I'm glad that this story explored. I like that aspect of Lancelot and that nobility. It was nice to see Percival restored too. I saw that happening at some point in time in the story. Yeah. I certainly didn't see it happening this way.
Well, and I didn't see him leaving. I saw him finding the Grail and becoming Percival.
Yep.
And sticking around. I didn't see them saying, okay, now you're done. And I think that, again, that was a neat little swerve where you get rid of Percival without killing him. And I thought that was kind of a cool way of handling it, because Kay died. So that's the first knight to fall. Now, Percival is the second knight, but you really can't say he fell because of why he left, why he's gone. It's, he moved on, so it's kind of a neat way to handle it.
Yeah, and I thought that was something that was really interesting in this story. It was nice in the battle sequence to see, like, the strength of Guinevere. Guinevere takes a hit during part of this, and she still keeps trucking on, which I thought was really cool, because she's a warrior in this, and it was important that she never loses that, because Commander Acton, the idea that she lived that life would not all of a sudden vanish. And I thought that was something that was interesting. The Grail being taken right away, Lancelot's reaction, like feeling responsible and being driven by that sense of responsibility, it goes to his ego, right? Because he's Lancelot, right? And
Yes.
he can't let go of being Lancelot, and
Say
him,
what?
yeah, and that was something that I thought was really, really great in the process, was that now his obsession becomes, I've got to get the Grail back. I've got to be the one. I've got to fix this mistake that I made. They took it under my watch. And he puts that ahead of everything else. And it becomes an interesting sort of a direction for him. Mordred getting the Grail was, of course, something I definitely saw coming. And being able to use it with Morgan now as a chess move.
Yeah.
And it just, there's no honor among thieves is clearly a thing there. And it was something that I really enjoyed.
Now, and here's the thing that ran through my head. So he 100% doesn't let her have it, so she can't cure herself.
Right.
If he had, she would have killed him on the spot.
Oh, yeah.
Flat out. There would have been no hesitation in my head at all that she would have just said, okay, I'm cured, thanks. Zap,
Right,
That
right.
would have been the very next move she would have done. So he 100%, we say there's no honor among thieves, and I agree with you, but he 100% was in the right not to let her heal. As long as she has that infection, she's not going to kill him. The second she's cured of that, he's the first to die, because he is too dangerous for her to have around.
Right. I agree. And that's where things become really, really fun in this. That particular component. And there's something to this story that I really, really enjoyed following. People kind of playing to their nature, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And that was something that the story just did really, really well. The Chapter 10 cover is another one. Seeing these Knights of the Round fully embracing modern weapons.
Yeah.
And there's something, at first I was like, wow, I don't know how I feel about that. By Chapter 10, especially Arthur's reaction to the gun very early on, the strategy of Arthur and understanding how that would blend into his knights, like they're all very comfortable with these new tools of war, and just, it's war is war, right? Just they're different weapons, different players on the field, but that is the way of, I guess, this kind of world, and I really liked that.
Well, again, it's the old saying that it's not the best weapon isn't the best weapon's the human mind. The best weapon is the actual warrior. What they use are just their tools. Any true warrior, any true knight can use any tool at hand for their actions. Whereas you and I, we could use a gun, but they could be just as deadly with a pencil. Because they are that warrior. So for them to naturally adapt and adjust and go into, we're not using swords and crossbows anymore. We're using these, the lightsabers, the ray guns, the rifles, and all the, and all that other, just that modern technology, that modern warfare. Again, they would naturally adapt to it. And I think, as you said, by this time in the story, they should be completely comfortable with that stuff. I like that.
Yeah, and that was, I think it was really important that they made us believe at this point that these are people that could adapt to that world.
Yeah.
So in this Prelude to War sequence, I didn't know at this point that we would still be getting the president and those other. I thought like Mordred had already taken care of them at this point. There's a point for our first reveal of Mordred and his outfit. I liked. We talk about your strategery, right? And because it's evil, we can say strategery now. We had some of the alien creatures. We had the genetically altered monkey, Morgan, and now Mordred in the costume. This one reminded me of his outfit from Excalibur, right?
Oh, big time. The Golden Knight look, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool.
Yes, 100%. And again, I loved how, I loved how the one, how Morgan Le Fay kills the one with just that growth on her back. It's just like, oh man, that is awesome. But going into, with Mordred, with the president of the United States, he's just laughing. Fool, pulls out his 6-shooters and just unleashes on him and drops him, and then he stands back up. He's fine now. I'm like, Oh, that is awesome. And it was funny with he said it was when he explained what happened, that's when I noticed on that page the grail on his chest plate.
Oh yeah.
Because again, when I was looking, when I'm first reading through it, I'm looking and I'm seeing, I didn't really see the Grail logo, and it's right there. I should have, but I was more focused on just what he was saying, the look, and all that, and going into with the president gunning him down. But as soon as he said that, I looked back at that full body page, and it's right there. The Grail is right in the center of his armor. I'm like, oh, that is cool. That is a neat usage of it. That's something that is a cool idea. That was a cool concept.
Yeah, and the idea of that being something that he's already been beaten by Arthur. So now you want to believe that he has some edge that puts him ahead of what he was before. And I loved how they played that out. And I didn't see, when he got the Grail, I didn't see the Grail being used that way.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated the clever choice that this would heal. It was basically saying that this was something that was meant for benevolent good, but like anything can be perverted for evil purposes. I really, really liked that.
Yeah, definitely. And, Arthur's siege, on the rocket, to get this giant rocket to go there. That was, again, something I was like, I didn't realize that the rockets were so rare, or that this special rocket to get there, they had to break into. But I loved this whole sequence, and even seeing the Needlemen are still following Arthur. Because, again, he is King Arthur who saved them. It was Percival who got them thinking, hey, relax. We're the good guys, but they're still loyal to Arthur. And I love seeing just the army storm that base. And again, Tristan doing what Tristan had to do to distract the guard.
Yep.
Again, that was absolutely wonderful because, again, they didn't want to do it, but again, you're a knight and you have to do it. And I thought that was a really cool moment.
Yes. And that was something that little tiny details like that, I think, added to the story, because Tristan has to make this moment of loyalty too, where it's like, you're asking me to do the thing that horrifies me the most. That was something that Tristan's reaction, Tristan taking one for the team and doing that, but being so angered by that. And then Arthur's conversation with Tristan, because Tristan's like, why'd you do that? Arthur basically saying, I need to know you were loyal. And
yes.
That was really a cool thing.
And I like, I like how he said, I know you retrieved that talisman. And that was a really cool moment. Where, again, that loyalty and that question and seeing what's going on. There are times when Arthur, really does come across as and you see why he does what he does.
Yep.
And it is a neat thing to see. And again, Tristan being Tristan, brought the talisman not for her cause, but to, if I have to, I'm going to force her to give me back my man. I'm going to force her to do this. And even Arthur's cool with, hey, you're loyal to the knights, and I understand what you're doing, but again, these were good moments between them, and These are the kind of conversations where if Arthur would have had frank and candid conversations with Tristan when everything first started, things would have been better off for all of them.
Oh, I agree, and I think that's been, but isn't that part of the tragedy of Arthur too? Yeah, has been. Because Arthur references it. Arthur knows Arthur is not the people person, is not a family person. And it's a regret of Arthur's. And I don't know, it's unfortunate because that's the tragedy of Arthur, right? He knows what his problem is. He also, I think, is his own worst enemy when it comes to being that person.
Yes.
And I feel bad for him. I actually really liked that part of the story where I care about Arthur's journey.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Yep.
And he's not just a jerk. And I think, that's a very important thing that you're seeing this. And you're seeing growth in the character in these 12 issues. As I said before, when he first was kind of more or less, he's first started off dismissive of Tristan because of the female form, calling him Lady Tristan.
Yep.
Now it's Sir Tristan and all that, and treating them like they are the knight that they are. And you're seeing this open dialogue, and it's Arthur learning from the mistakes he's made, trying to reconcile that. And I think that was kind of a neat. Again, this is within 12, within 10 issues, we're seeing this growth of Arthur. We're seeing this person who we're like, yes, this is okay. This is the king. This is why they're following. Again, all within the confines of some great story and some great action sequences. Like her fight sequence with the guard taking out was awesome. Then the final fight scene where they're breaking into the rocket and the chaos of battle going on. To the point where where the final launching of the fact that they have no power cells. The energy system for this rocket is not charged. Well, I've got that covered. Excalibur isn't just about destruction. And I love the energy that is in Excalibur charges the power cells. Full power, launch, rock and roll. I thought that, for me, was a great usage of Excalibur.
But here's the funny part. Like, the end of, the last issue, they were just talking about what Excalibur can't do. Now it's like Excalibur can make coffee. I mean, I loved, it's such a funny, wacky world where it's like, I can't tell the truth and all that kind of stuff, but can power spacecraft.
But that's just the pure raw energy that is inside Excalibur. Because we've seen Excalibur do stuff like cut through a wall, and do all kind of stuff that normally a normal sword would not be able to do.
Sure. But it was, I thought it was an irony to it. I loved that the ship had these like panels to it, the solar panels and things like that when it got out into space, or not solar panels, but these kind of sailing panels. Yeah. It was an interesting, I love when artists get wacky with spacecraft, and you sit there and go, based on what we know about how space works, some of these things are and are not necessarily the most practical. But I love the look of that spacecraft and how it operates in general. I thought it was to me, it's the best of sci-fi fantasy artwork.
I'll be honest with you, that kind of stuff would work, and it is used in modern spaceships. The solar panels that go out like that.
Oh yeah.
So that was the thing I liked about this fact that in the 80s, this artist did put these giant solar panels, because the thing that would prevent, if this was in an atmosphere, large panels like that would throw off the flight. But in outer space, there is no atmosphere. So there's nothing that would catch on it that would cause it to slow down the ship. So the ship could 100% fly at full capacity with those things out. It's like, I can't think of the one space. There was that one sci-fi show that had the spaceships doing complete, not doing any banks, and they were just, left and right, 90-degree turns, and just, shifting, where they were going. And again, they followed true science of, what combat, flight would be in space. You don't have to do banks like you do in the atmosphere in a planet. You could just literally take from point A and just slide over, and slide up, slide down, and just, bebop around like that. So I like when I see stuff like that.
We're seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
You're framing it up better than I am. I guess what I'm saying is we're seeing banks and things like that maybe aren't necessarily necessary in there. But I loved that through the wacky design, you see some elements that are practical. In a lot of sci-fi fantasy art, you'll see things that are put on spacecraft that aren't necessarily necessary, because of what we know about space travel and the difference between what happens in our atmosphere versus what happens in outer space. I loved the way that this ship, it looked cool. And sometimes what ends up happening in sci-fi art, what looks cool is just that. It looks cool, but it's not necessarily practical. I love that as you're seeing this, we're like, well, there's actually a practical power source that's being put out here in this thing that looks cool, which isn't always linked in fantasy artwork, if that makes sense, with sci-fi, because it doesn't necessarily always, because there's artistic license, shall we say, it doesn't necessarily translate into the most practical solution. Mordred and Morgainers, it's an interesting sort of team up with them. Because what we get to see in this process is, I loved the way that it went with Isolde so much better than what I was thinking. I mentioned earlier that I was thinking very early on, I'm talking about like in the first 6 issues when we first saw her reveal, I'm like, well, what if Tom maybe really is the real person?
Yeah.
These sequences where we see her and her morality and the fact that she's starting to realize what's going on around her and that like she's been duped. Because she didn't realize one was Mordred and didn't realize that Morgan was who Mordred was working with and any of those pieces. As she starts to discovering what's going on, she starts taking an active role in bringing this whole thing down. And I thought that was way cool to see, you get this idea of why does Tristan love her so much? Because they are like almost this great team up. And he respects her for the portrayal of female characters in this, I think was, especially in the 80s, I thought was really strong.
Yeah.
For the time period. When you think about it, this is early 80s that this is being done in. And we're taking some female characters who are really active participants in this, and they're soldiers. And yeah, there's the Tristan piece as far as I want to be a male versus this frail female form, but yet all of Tristan's actions would indicate that there's some advantages to the female form in the sense that there's a speed and there's a clever way of acting. And Commander Acton, Guinevere in this one, certainly is not taking a backseat to anybody. There's not a lot of protecting of Guinevere in this. Guinevere is just as much a member of the team as everybody else, which I really liked. I actually liked that idea that it wasn't at every second, protect Guinevere, Guinevere, any more than there would be protect King Arthur, if that makes any sense. Yeah, you protect the queen the same way you would the king, but she's kind of like one of the knights and part of the team, and it's very matter of fact in this. And I really liked that. And it was some of my favorite comics in the 80s. You and I were both big fans of the X-Men, particularly when Storm was the team leader.
Yes.
And, that was my first exposure to the X-Men was the story where Ileana was taken over into Belasco's kind of like demon world. And Storm was very much rooted as the team leader during that time. This was before she lost her powers and got the Mohawk.
Yeah.
And I grew up with like that being a thing and just being, your acceptance of a team leader. And I love that this story is very reminiscent of that era where comics were doing some things that are pretty clever with their handling of females. I'm not saying that there weren't, like cheesecake moments and things like that. Sure, there were, and there's some truth to looking at that. But they were taking some strides in their portrayal of females before film, I think, was doing a lot of this. And it was kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. And again, one of the neat things about this, as you said, is the strong female character in this. It's the thing with that really caught me that I absolutely loved. When Mordred and Morgan, getting ready to transport to the planet, to the alien world. I love how, again, Mordred is still playing her. She's this powerful witch, but Mordred is playing her because she's expelling more and more energy, making his position stronger.
Yep.
And I loved that, and she had no choice. They had to get there. Even though she doesn't want to, but she knows the brother's on the way there to free Merlin, so they've got to do this to stop him. I thought that was absolutely brilliant on how they do this. But then even the little, not so subtle, how the carriers are made. Because I never noticed that. I saw them, you see them making the carriers, but it didn't dawn on me that living creatures are ripping off their arms and being used. It's made out of bones. I was like, oh, okay, so when they die, they make them. Oh, no. While they're still alive, they're ripping off their limbs and attaching them together to make a carrier for these two creatures. I'm like, oh, my God, that is awesome.
Yeah. And that was not only once, they did it a second time because it was done for her. And the idea that these creatures are being sacrificed, because you get to see more, and why are they just going along with this blindly? Well, not really. And I was glad to see that layer put into this piece, and we'll talk about it more. But we do get to see Arthur and his crew encounter their mother, and the mother's kind of like, well, I'm not okay with this.
Yes.
And I did not expect that to be a layer of this. And that was the thing that, why should this be a 12-issue maxi series? Because you can explore some of this stuff with depth. And it wasn't this over-reliance on just doing Arthurian legend. It was setting up some of these other pieces that Morgan has been here for a long time, but they're not necessarily happy about it. They're slaves as well, and they want to rebel.
Yes. Oh, big time. And again, laying the groundwork for, didn't even see, again, that was a part of the story I didn't even see coming. And I love the fact that they did that so well. And looking back, you can see, the dead eggs of the hatchlings that we're going to later learn are actually the dead children. We see them ripping off their arms and using it to make this thing. We're seeing all the different evil stuff that Morgan Le Fay did there, which is why, again, further adding why we need the knights there. And it was a great moment. And then you go back to the Lady in the Lake. That whole sequence was absolutely brilliant. Not just with the lady explaining who the lady is, where she comes from. I love the moments where Lancelot is a little unhinged. And he's, doing it. He's snapping necks. He's being nasty. And it's Guinevere who's like, hey, here's what, because Tom's like, we got to step in. He's like, no, he needs to vent his anger or he'll take it out on himself because he failed. He lost the Grail. And I thought that for me was a great sequence in there. Again, It does show some of Lancelot's personal issues that he has with himself. He 100% blames himself. Okay? And yes, he should. He was the guardian, but it happens. You and I would be a lot more understanding than Lancelot is of himself. But again, look back I don't know about you, but in my life, I've made some stupid mistakes, and they've haunted me longer than they should have. I'll say something wrong, or I didn't say something when I should have said it. Those kind of things, those regrets do haunt me longer than they should. And again, this is haunting Lancelot right now. And it's a great way to show it in his aggression and just his personality. He's not Lancelot. He's Lancelot. It's a very different person going on here. And I like this. I like how they're doing this in little subtle bits and little subtle handlings of it.
Seeing him through the eyes of Elaine, I thought was really cool too. Because you're right about Elaine's story and the fact that I don't remember that being the story of the Lady of the Lake. I loved that kind of explanation of who Elaine was, what her relationship was with Lancelot, why she wound up being this, and how it wound up being a travel tool for them. She has morphed into this, and she's found peace in this way, and she wishes nothing but the same for him, knowing that it may be something that he'll never fully achieve. And it was kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, and I have no recollection of this story at all of the Lady of the Lake. At all. So I was like, this is kind of, again, they do a great job with taking what is the story, what is the legend they're going with, throwing it in there. They spent basically a single page and explaining it, plenty of time in there. I'm loving the story. I'm loving how they go. And again, it gives them a great transport tool to this planet on the other side of the galaxy. If the planet has water, she can get there. Because that is her. And I was like, that is awesome, man.
I love when they open the doorway, though, and they're just sitting there with that swag.
Hey, what took you so long?
That was really cool. And that was a great way to wrap up this whole sequence because they're looking at the Castle Le Fay, which very cool in the background, and seeing that this is getting ready for the last two chapters, which are the final strike. I like the cover of this one because this story has gone from being one kind of grounded in Arthurian legend to now going a lot more sci-fi at this moment. And this was the right time for this cover. Because that's a bold cover, too, where you'd see just how small they are in relation to that. And I didn't see this issue going where it did. It was nice to see, the family again, because we saw the father leaving his family to go and rejoin the Knights. But that there's a family reaction to this. These people have all had lives. They've lived full lives to this point. And there's going to be some impact. And I'm glad that those lives didn't just go away in this process. We get to see some really cool... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, that's the thing with, as you said, with the family. And Gawain has always keeps bringing up the family. So I'm glad, like you said, I'm glad they went back to went back to the family, even if they're only spending a page. But even the fact that the son he's like, I don't care, but you can see he does, because he's got that one little tear running down his face. And it was one of those cool kind of moments. And then again, going right into Izzy, where she's like, hey, what is this? This is wrong. Stop this now. I'm in charge. And it was a neat moment of, again, strong female character. She's stepping to her own. She's recognizing what's going on. She sees the seal of Morgan Le Fay, and she's like, we got to warn him.
Yeah. And that part is pretty critical in that moment. And in that warning, she's leaving, again, that message for Tristan that we get to see later, which was kind of cool. I needed to because here's the thing. I'm Team Tom because of the fact that we've been traveling with Tom so long. These are really important if you're going to really invest us in the relationship of Tristan and Isolde. And I needed these moments. I needed to start feeling something for her and kind of going, oh, I kind of get why Tristan's like, feeling the way that he is. And it really became important. It added a complication to the story, which I like. To me, that was far more interesting drama.
Now, I like the explanation of how basically the world almost destroyed itself with the bombs and all that. And it was one of those things where they had to live in those structures for a while, and then society would rebuild and come back out of it. I thought I don't know if it was 100% needed for the story, but I did like the fact that they put that in there.
Well, think about when this takes place too.
Right.
What were we talking about in the 80s?
Yeah, exactly.
The worry of World War III back then was huge. Funny part is, history repeating itself. Look where we're at right now. I mean, this story is very contemporary right now in a lot of layers. That is another element right now where it's some scary times right now. This story has just as much relevance today, I think, across the board. So when you talk about a story that holds up, all of the issues that it's addressing in this are really just as relevant today as they were back in the 80s. Sadly so, in some cases. I'm seeing this piece with the printout coming through and Tom getting the reveal that was supposed to take like an hour. and Tom getting that. And I wasn't surprised to see Tom cut. But now, Tom didn't just cut it off. He's like, let's burn this bad boy.
Yeah. Now, he did only burn the bottom of the transmission, so I'm glad there. So he kept the other part of this director, kept that.
Yes, absolutely. So we get to see this. They're now being taken over to, and I love that Tristan's like, I don't want to get on that thing. I hate this. I want.
Again, it's the female form thing. And
Correct.
I like how the fact that both Tristan and Guinevere were the ones who kind of had that buzzing, and they knew something was going on. And it was that, again, that connection, that kind of humming, and it was only the two of them. And it was because the female form was finding it. And this, for me, was a really neat moment because, again, it's Tristan starting to realize there are certain things this form has an advantage over the male form. Now, still does not want to be called a female, but starting to acknowledge and understand that. And I thought that was a kind of a neat, moment.
The reveal of the mother was an interesting one, and it was neat to see that Guinevere was the one that the mother wanted to talk to, recognizing the female as the leader. Because of that, that's how their culture is. And Arthur, at that moment, drops, because he'd been calling her Commander Acton all the way through, pulling back now. And that does show the nobility of King Arthur, where he's recognizing, okay, I got to cut the nonsense right now. Queen Guinevere, go ahead and speak to her. That was where it dropped in that moment, and recognizing that I need to support her. I need to recognize her for who she is and recognize that diplomatically she is the best suited to handle this and will handle it. And she did. And I loved seeing how that whole sequence played out where, what's being done to the children is something that the mother would find as an atrocity. And she's like, we'll help you. Like, we want to take them down just as bad as you do. We will help you mount this offensive and make this happen. Just protect my babies, and I thought that was a really cool twist.
Yeah, when you talked about the cover, that I was surprised when I saw that because I'm like, what the heck is that? But then within the confines of the story, you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. And again, we saw earlier how Morgan Le Fay kind of took over this planet, but there was even more behind it. There was more under the surface and more of the story. So I love how this tale with all these different characters, with all these different things, gives you the initial piece, then a little bit later explains it, then a little bit later, hammers it home. And this for me was a really neat, story element.
You know what I found from this story? Merlin and I have vastly different tastes. I mean, Hey, listen, to each there's somebody for everybody, and I get it. Here's the thing. I would never encroach on that relationship.
No. I'm with you on that one, buddy. But again, it's funny how they made, the majority of her form, very appealing.
Sure.
It's just that, just that one little bit there that you're like, yeah, no, thank you. I will pass on that. Thank you.
Yeah. The mask is important.
The mask is very important.
The confrontation between Arthur and Lancelot, where Lancelot takes out Arthur for the obvious reason of he has to lead that assault because of the Grail, his obsession. What makes it more powerful is his respect for Arthur, how he's deferred to that and was willing to try and set aside his relationship out of that respect. So that adds so much more weight to this moment where he's kind of like, well, I'm going to go back on that one and go from there. And Arthur's changing as this story's gone on, where even his relationship with Guinevere, where he's like sitting here, the past is the past, and we may only do our part. Life is short for regrets. Any regrets, my queen. And in that moment, he's come full circle where he's realizing, okay, there's so much of this that I did wrong. Your regrets, my regrets. We got to kind of let those go at this point. And recognize something further. And that is pretty true to the Arthurian story, right? He comes around. It usually takes a lot for him to come around. Yeah. Case in point, life and death situations like this. But he does eventually come around, which was a good thing.
Yeah. Again, it's showing growth in just who the king is. And he's not a complete jerk here. And you don't want him to be a complete jerk. You need him to be a hero. You need him to be that kind of step up.
So, speaking of good battle sequences, boy, does this lead to some really good battle sequences for both Lancelot and Tristan in particular. Not everybody, but Lancelot and Tristan were the ones that I wanted to see because you get to see, Tristan's final confrontation with the former husband-to-be, and you get to see Lancelot's with Mordred, which was a battle that I wanted to see take place as well. Because Lancelot is like this master swordsman and is truly the greatest warrior of all those knights. Going up against Mordred, who now can't be stopped, was something that was really great because that was kind of Lancelot and Arthur's relationship, right?
Yeah.
And now you get to see that come full circle with the son.
Well, and again, I loved how that ended the issue. How those sequences, both where Tristan's getting all tied up in the form that was her ex-husband or fiance, and then Lancelot gets stabbed through and he's laying on the ground, because Mordred can't die because of the Grail. And I thought that for me was just a great, ending of a story. It gets you to the point where like I now have to read issue 12. Yeah. If we had read this on a monthly basis, that ending would have pissed me off. So I'd be like, no, I want to read it now. I want to read it now. What's going on here? Come on. And then you go into issue 12 with the cover where you've got this rubble pile of the crown, of Excalibur, of Mordred's, Morgan Le Fay stuff. There's a couple hands in there. You're like, what just happened, man? And you got the mushroom cloud of a nuclear bomb. You're like, wow, okay, this is going to really be the grand ending of this.
Yeah, well, to your point, like you get this symbolism of World War III. It's all about symbols in issue 12, which I thought was really great. This was a great cover because the way this story is going to wrap up, it really is you're left then with symbols and legend and lore versus a lot that's tangible. And that's kind of the story of Arthur. And this Long Live the King opening sequence where you get to see, you know, the two, really, the brother and half-sister kind of locked in battle in this final sequence was just really, really cool.
Oh, yeah. And again, the traditional siege warfare with the battle ram trying to knock down the door. And, you know, Guinevere, again, right there in command. She's like, strike. You know, she's giving the orders. Arthur and the other knights, and then as well as some of the aliens, are sitting there using the ram to break down the door. I thought that was a really cool usage of, you know, the multiple front battle sequences. You know, the chaos of war. Just, you know, how you lay it out, how you keep it balanced, how you keep the action going from one sequence to another sequence is something that this series did a brilliant job with. Especially, you know, in this last issue of this is a lot of heavy action going on, but it's not just pure action. There's story being driven within it.
Now, Amber's escape, or Tristan's escape, was due to the dropping of the talisman, right? Not, I mean, accidental dropping, but that was when the explosion kicked off, right?
Yes, I think so.
So it was funny how the talisman in many ways did save Tristan's life, but Tristan's like ready to end it all. Because feeling all hope is lost of being able to recover that form. And I like that it's Tom at the end who's basically saying, you could learn to like it, learn to kind of see yourself in a whole new light. And Tristan seeing like that there's a doorway to that possibility. Tom's saying all the right things in those moments. Yeah. And that doesn't, it doesn't change the complication that is Tristan. But I really liked how, in that moment, it kind of sets up the ending of this. And it's not the way Tom would have wanted it, but it is true to what the doorway that Tom opened, right. Where, Tristan can... There may be another... Maybe all hope's not lost to you finding your own path, I guess, which is the moral ending of that story. And I thought it was really an interesting arc. I didn't expect that, like, if you told me at the beginning of this, one of your favorite arcs is going to be Tristan's. It was one of my favorite arcs in this whole thing. Maybe my favorite arc.
I'll be honest with you. Yeah, I would very easily argue the Tom Tristan Isolde story is my favorite arc in this because, again, just the nature of this and how everything went through. And I love this sequence where Tom's like, "Hey, yeah, you're a woman and you're going to stay one, but you could like it. I know you could." And just the look on their face, like. I don't know. Perhaps just then Gwaine comes in. He's like, "Your timing bites, Gwaine." I chuckled at this. I thought this was a great moment, and then it had a made me laugh there. It was really a solid part of this story.
And it looks like it's Isolde.
Isolde?
I'm looking up the pronunciation just to see because I've given it like 8 different pronunciations I've been going through.
I usually call them Izzy.
Yeah.
And that's how I've been. Whenever I read it, that's how I read it.
That isn't one of the pronunciations, but
no, it's not. But it works for me.
It's basically broken up as Izolduh. Isolde.
Isolde.
It says say it out loud and exaggerate the sounds until you can consistently produce them. I don't know that I'm going to go that far with it, but
Isolde.
You will, but
I will now.
Now you're making it sound like a magic act.
Isolde,
the great Isolde.
Though it now needs something going along with it, like Isolde the Magnificent.
Yes, yes, I like it. It's so the ending battle sequence with scope and scale and numbers because you really see a lot of these alien creatures now coming out from everywhere.
Yeah,
as a part of the whole battle, and you knew that the death was going to come where he was Galahad was going to sacrifice himself. I didn't know where or when, but that was kind of set up from the beginning, and it's an example of sometimes where you set something up and it's okay for it to be predictable where it's going to go. It's more of the how you achieve it. And I thought that was a great sequence of events where he just needed to do that. That needed to be his way of making things right. He needed his honor. And he mentioned it from the beginning, that he would stick with them until he was able to make his...
And that's going part of to who, not only who Galahad is, but part of who the body Galahad had become reincarnated in. That person had failed to protect their lord. And by their code of honor, they were getting ready to kill themselves when Lancelot showed up. So there's still that honor debt that they have to pay. And again, you saw it 100% coming. When the ship came in, I'm like, oh yeah, this is it, And I like why he did it. He saved the day. I liked Arthur and Guinevere's reaction to it. Because yes, sacrificed himself. We must accomplish. We cannot fail him. And again, it's that further on of these two now are on the same page. They're working together, even though they are apart now. And I thought, for me, that was just a great moment of all these characters. It was an ending we all 100% saw it coming, but it was a good moment to do that. It was a coolness for Arthur and Guinevere. It was one of those things that I was like, man, that is awesome. And then that leads right into this great sequence with Lancelot and Mordred. Because, again, he's lying there dead. Is he? No, he's not. Why? Because he's still Lancelot. And I absolutely love the fact that he's just fighting through. He's like, how are you? How dare you? It's impossible. He's like, what? With God, all things are possible. I absolutely love that,
That is something that I thought was really cool. I actually like the way that the Merlin and Mordred whole piece happened too. I like that it wasn't this Arthur has to beat Mordred by being the better swordsman kind of thing. It was Arthur beat him with strategy. And there's something to that where really out of Arthur and Lancelot, Lancelot's the far better swordsman. So this wasn't about Arthur being the better swordsman. It was about Arthur being able to recognize through the fact that his people were telling him, Merlin's the son of the devil. The Grail was touched by our Lord if the two meet. And that whole idea of it being like this collaboration of using smarts to overcome your enemy was something that was really, really cool.
Oh, yeah, big time. And again, interesting sequence when Arthur and Mordred are fighting. Mordred's like, you wanted me dead. You always did. And Arthur replies back, you would not believe me if I told you differently. So I will not. I am now really questioning whether he did try to drown him as a small child. I think all of that was fabrication, either done on the part of the mother character, done on the part of Morgan Le Fay, done on somebody. There was something not completely kosher with that story. Except,
here's the problem is you're dealing with a different time.
Right.
Again, we're dealing with medieval times where what was...
I'm not 100. It's one of those things where I'm like, it's giving me doubt as to what actually happened.
And there's a part of me that thinks that it totally could have happened.
Right.
But it's not even like a debate where I'm like debating you. It's more of I see what you're saying, and I see the possibility. I also think that very well could have been exactly what went down.
Yeah,
unfortunately. And actually, I like that the story never clarifies or corrects it. I'm glad that we're left to interpret it, because I think the reality is this story does that in a lot of areas, and I think it's a better story for it. What it leaves you with questions about, I think, are just as important as what it answers. If I'm making any sense there.
Oh, definitely. No, yeah.
So the battle wrapping up and how that all went, I thought was just really classic, and like at this point we wanted to see the great cleanup moments and some great art sequences that we got to see. I was glad that Morgan wasn't done in that moment. Like Merlin had kept the Grail from her, but that wasn't the end of Morgan. Her magic was going to keep her going, and she turns into that spider-like creature.
Yeah, Spider Queen.
Yeah. And I was glad to see that wasn't the ending of the whole thing. But this was Arthur's sacrifice. Arthur's got to make a last stand. And he's like, get them out of here. I will handle this one as a true leader in this moment. And this is part of what Excalibur is. And I love that he's passing on Excalibur to not even just a different generation, but to a different species that he's now been a symbol for. Because, on this planet now, his legend has become a whole new symbol for just it expands beyond Earth. It's now a legend in space. That was like this kind of cool thing.
Yeah, big time. Again, and it's funny because I kind of saw the sacrifice coming as the story was playing on. When it was initially being built, I didn't see, when I was initially reading this, I didn't see that coming. At the end there, when the alien armada shows up and all that, you 100% can see the sacrifice coming. Yeah. And I love the fact that when you can see something coming and you still say that was awesome, that tells you the strength of a story. And this shows, throughout this, we had Arthur making peace with Guinevere. We have Arthur making peace with Lancelot. We have Arthur making peace with himself over the mistakes he's made to get to this point. To the point where he's able to, once again, put the sword in a stone, detonate a massive explosion, reassemble the Grail. He did all, this is serious power levels crossing over and save the world. And I loved how it kind of wrapped everything up. And it does give us this happy ending, but there was the price. Sir Kay, Sir Percival, Sir Galahad, and King Arthur, all four have their gravestones, all have their markings on New Camelot. And I do like the fact that New Camelot's continuing. We're seeing, the war over and everybody celebrating and cheering, yay! But there is those moments. And again, back to the remaining characters, who's still around, what they do. This was a great ending to a story.
Yeah, and that truly is it, because the stuff that it wraps up now are important. There's nothing that's done too quickly. The war being over and the epilogue with the remaining knights that are still alive, and they're kind of figuring out where to go from here and honoring their dead, I thought was really great. We got to see everyone, get honored. Merlin kind of drift back off like he was going to. I am gone to plan and to ponder until the cycle begins anew, knowing that this will happen again.
Yep.
Kind of drifting off into legend once again. And honestly, you could see why, with the amount of power this guy expends, he has to kind of
rest
for
1,000 plus years.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the thing with Tom, don't want to skip over Sir Gawain going back and reuniting with his family, which, again, that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go into Tom, and I love how he's sitting in the room reading the Arthurian legend.
Yep.
That for me was like, oh, that is awesome. Again, I love that moment. And then even when, Tristan calls him into the room, I'm like, wow, what's going on here? And then even she's wearing that wedding dress, and I'm like, she's wearing a dress, and I'm like, this is okay. No, there's Isolde.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I thought Tristan, just now having to spend a good portion of life trying to figure out, where do I go from here? Can I move forward with Isolde and make a relationship from there? And I think Tom helped set Tristan on this path of, I probably can. Yeah. And it's going to be a process, and this was the beginning of that process. And we get to see a moment that, one of the things that I really liked about the art choices with this is there's implications of what happens between the two of them, but it's done subtly. And you could have gone, again, gratuitous, and I think it would have been gratuitous just for the sake of being gratuitous. Instead, let's use art to imply what's happening, give it enough of a romantic connotation that you get this satisfying feeling that maybe Tristan's going to be okay. And maybe this relationship could actually work and you hope it well for the two of them.
Agree with you on stuff. And again, it was one of those things where, the art choice throughout this has been, they've done this so well. Yeah. And again, it's the use, because you talk about gratuitous to be gratuitous, sexy to be sexy, or sexy to tell the story. And I think that's something that this story really did well between the two of them. And I 100% was left with the point where they were going to figure it out. These two kids were going to be okay together, because this was the first moment when I love how Isolde connected Tristan back to what it was the first night when they were together, and bring it back to that, and how she was like, it was the rose garden, and that was heaven. And in that room, it's just covered with roses. So that room had to smell like a giant rose garden. And again, just reminding Tristan of those physical moments of when they were together. And I thought that for me was a really neat, kind of moment.
We get this great conclusion with Lancelot and Guinevere where she's pregnant. Obviously, there was a moment between Arthur and Guinevere that we didn't see.
Yeah.
And she's hoping that it's his baby. And that's a hard thing to hear, but I like Lancelot taking the high road and going, you know what, I hope it's his too. And there's something to be said for true love between the two of them where he understands where she's coming from, that's a chance for Arthur to have a legacy and that they can both be a part of together. It does say something romantic about their relationship that they're able to have that honest conversation. Seeing Tom move on and move forward and be kind of a knight for the modern age was something that's really cool. Like, he's a part of the rebuilding process. He's a part of taking the lessons learned, the positive lessons learned.
Yeah.
Because there's ones you kind of you can let go. But there's some positive lessons that are learned there that I think was just really kind of a cool part of this whole story. And then this ending, I didn't expect this. Like, on the alien planet, there's now this new kind of Arthurian creature and almost a new kind of alien Knights of the Round Table that is kind of reimagining the whole concept again. It was kind of a cool little ending.
Yeah, neat ending. I love this. Again, the notion of this alien pulling the sword from the stone now. So now we have this other alien, but then even the overshadowing of Arthur. And whether Arthur is inhabiting that alien body or whether that alien is continuing on the fight, I don't know. I don't care. Great ending on the continuation of the legend.
It was just a good conclusion of the story. I honestly think that I'm so glad we did this. I had no idea what to expect because this wasn't it's a classic story, but it isn't a story that I've read or you've read. I've heard good things about it, but if you were to say, Sean, did you know enough walking into this to know that it was going to be this kind of story? No. So we really went into this one pretty blind, other than confidence in the creative team that they were going to deliver a story. It was kind of a fun way to approach this one, knowing that it was a classic story and it was one of the early Maxi series, but not knowing much else. I really, really enjoyed this one, and I'm glad. Thanks for being willing to do this one because I really enjoyed this. And I think it was a fitting one for our anniversary of the podcast, 16 years of doing this, and a chance to do something that was meaty, that was something that neither of us had touched before.
Yeah, and again, this is, I'm so glad we did this. 100%. And it's one of the neat things about this show where we've gotten to cover stuff where I never would have picked it up. I never would have, even thought, hey, let me give this a read. And it turns into something that I absolutely love, to the point where I now find it, I'm seeking out the Arthurian legends again. Yeah. I'm seeking out other stories, other variations, other tellings of the legend, and it's re-inspired that energy I had. Because when just clarifying for everyone, when I was reading this stuff in college. So it's been many, many, many years since I actually read any of these stories. So I've got to go back into my brain cells, which aren't the greatest in the world anymore, and remember stuff from back then. So this is reignited something that, when I was sitting in BG, that I would read, and I hit the BG library and I picked up stuff from the actual university library, and everybody else is around there studying, and I'm reading a story just for the fun of it. I was doing reading just for the fun of it sometimes in college, and I needed these escape moments, and the Knights of the Round Table, a lot of the, you mentioned Robin Hood, a lot of the Robin Hood stuff. I was reading back then as well, as for a kind of an escape, to help me, center my head. And so going back to remembering those days, remembering back then has been just an absolute joy for me. And I now want to approach this stuff now, looking at life the way I look at it now.
Yeah, I get that. It's this has given me kind of a fresh take on the legend, and I'm excited for more from this. This is cool.
Nothing like the handy-dandy electro-claw for carving through metal doors.
I would like to remind everyone about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388 4434 or drnorge on Skype. We love having you part of the show. RagingBullets@gmail.com is our email address. If you prefer to contact us that way. We have RagingBullets.com, our show website, which feeds into Twitter and our Facebook fan page. We're also proud to be proud of a great Facebook group community, and I want to thank everyone over the years who has posted either in the original version, which is still there, or the current version that is currently active, just for really just making it a fun location to go to and talk comics. Actually, as Jim and I are heading into our anniversary, 16 years of podcasting as of March 23rd, and both of these episodes kind of fell on both sides of the anniversary, which worked out really well. I really want to thank people from the podcasting community who really have supported us throughout the years. When I first got into comics podcasts by listening to Comic Geek Speak, and this is back when Brian and Peter first kicked it off. And very early on, I reached out to Peter Rios and mentioned that after doing some audio comments for their shows, that I really wanted to do my own podcast. And Peter kind of helped me flesh out the ideas for doing this podcast. And I really want to thank Peter for that. I was lucky enough at that time to go on Ian Levinstein's podcast, which was Geek Speak at the time, and kind of get my feet wet doing something a little more substantial. I always count Ian as a friend for being somebody who we've done multiple crossover episodes with, but also helped me get my start in podcasting. I'm not going to be able to shout out every single name of people who are podcasters who have helped throughout the years, especially very early on. But I remember Chris Marshall from Collector's Comic Library, Bruce Rosenberger, who was doing his Comics Cast at the time in particular, reached out to me with some advice. But there's so many, and if I left your name out, please know it's not a slight. I don't want it to be played off on my own podcast for shouting out people and knowing that I'm going to ultimately leave people out. One thing I'm going to say just globally in general, and this goes back to Comic Geek Speak, I think very early on, the comics podcasting community was just this welcoming group of people that shouted each other out, helped and supported people, and that was not only present in the community of people who were listeners who were helping out, but also people who are podcasting. And I think this has just been a safe, fun community of supportive people. And you see that in the current generation. You know, throughout the years, different podcasts have, and this has only grown leaps and bounds. I just really am proud to be a part of this continuing developing and evolving community of podcasters out there that are producing content, supporting this medium that we all know and love. So, I don't know, 16 years in, and obviously I couldn't do this without you, Jim. This was supposed to be a rotating cast of characters, and very early on, I made the wise decision to ask you first, and it just felt right, and I genuinely look forward to recording with you every week. This is just, it's hanging out with one of my absolute best friends, just talking comics. And I love the fact that we're similar in so many ways, but different in just as many. And I honestly think those differences, I love to hear your reactions to stories because you're just naturally speculating in ways that are different than mine. And you've made this show a pure pleasure to do. And this would not be the same podcast without you. So thank you for being willing to take the leap and go on this ride with me.
Yes, you are 100% wise to select me.
Humble as always.
Yes, humble as always. And I'll be honest with you, I've said multiple times how much this show, the people, you, comic books in general have helped me and saved me through some of the roughest times of my life. And I could not have done it without you. I could not have done it without all the people. You threw out a bunch of names, and there's so many more names we could throw onto that list. There's so many of the our reoccurring friends who chime in, who we talk to, regular listeners who just say, "Oh, I gotta, call in and do a comment." Our buddy Rasul, come on, man, absolutely love that guy. He's wonderful. There's so many people out there that I absolutely am so grateful that I've had the opportunity to meet, to get to know, and to spend some time with. And, I'm looking forward to, events and just continuing on of this this fun little roller coaster that we call a podcast. Because, it's, just when I think I know exactly what's going to happen, you change the question. So it's that kind of is the fun stuff for me. And I'm so grateful that you got me back into comics. You got me back into doing, you introduced this whole concept to me of what this was. And, throughout it all, man, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You mentioned Russell before, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention just the people that have been guests on our show over the years, whether they've come on once or multiple times. People have given a lot of their time and energy to this podcast to contribute, whether they've called in, they've emailed in, they've been guests on our show. And I'm talking everything from creators to comic professionals to people who have come on and given the chance to this podcast that is a DC-centric podcast that have been willing to say, hey, we're promoting an independent book or a movie or a fan production or something that we're real passionate about, or an audio drama, case in point. We've been able to, I've really counted myself lucky that our podcast has served as kind of this cool way, I think, to get to know more about the pop culture media and how it's produced and passion projects, how they come to life. The pros and cons, challenges to promoting that. And it's something that it's only enhanced my love for not only this medium, but for the people that have helped put it together over the years. So this has just been a great opportunity. 16 years in, and I honestly am just as excited to record now as in some ways more now than I was back when we started, which is unusual to say when you've been doing this long. But I really feel like the past year in particular, it's like reignited my excitement for doing this. And I hope for the people listening that comes across because this has been fun. I'd be nuts if I didn't mention my wife, who is incredibly patient from this, because it's not just recording this podcast. My wife has to be there with me when I'm got a laptop in front of me and I'm editing. and that's a big part of the show. It actually takes just as long to edit the show, if not longer, than it does to record it. So it's something that she allows me the time to be able to do each week in order to prepare. It's funny, last week I was scrambling as we were getting ready to go on vacation to get out the first part of this because I wanted it out on Sunday. And we've been really committed to trying to stick to a weekly release schedule and have done, I'm thrilled to say, a great job getting back on this with the pandemic. We had a few years where we were doing 2 to 3 releases a month and really made a commitment to get back on board to doing a weekly podcast. And I think that's helped reinvigorate the show too. And I'm just excited for more. So thank you to everybody that's listened, whether you listen casually and, just bebop in and out depending on your preference of the topics, or you listen all the time. Thank you for everybody who's shouted out the show, whether you've posted it on a forum, retweeted, anywhere that you let people know that this podcast exists. We rely heavily on that. We don't have an advertising budget, so to speak. And I would say this of any podcast out there. Anytime you spend shouting out the podcast that you're enjoying, getting the word out, there is a lot of competition out there now, which I think is a good thing. I'm a big listener of podcasts as much as I am one that enjoys recording one. And I really appreciate anybody listening to this that has taken the time to shout us out as being a show that should be on somebody's list. I don't care if I'm first on somebody's list or last. It's the fact that somebody feels that we are of value to be a part of their listening cycle. And thank you for giving the time that you do, because we can tend to be, case in point, this episode, a meaty listen. So I do appreciate the time that people give to our show. With that being said, we are sponsored, as always, by DCB Service and InStockTrades.com. Jim, what is going on over at DCBService.com?
Well, of course, we got great deals on statues and comics and whatnot, but they are also have the Free Comic Book Day 2022 Dark Crisis event. So if you're not able to go to a traditional store, you can order it from our friends at DCBS. So thank you.
Over at InStockTrades.com, just a reminder, in the new releases, they got the Batman The Long Halloween, Catwoman When in Rome hardcover. $49.99 regularly, 40% off, only $28.99. That is an amazing story. Over at the new releases, we've also got Superman The Man of Steel hardcover, volume 4, $49.99 regularly, 42% off, only $28.99. And the Superman Batman Omnibus hardcover, volume 2, $125 regularly, 42% off, only $72.50. You can can see how those discounts help you save money. And I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. I want to shout out once again the Foundling Museum's Superheroes Orphans and Origins, 125 years in comics, running from April 1st to August 28th, 2022. This exhibit is something you should definitely check out. You will find links to the museum in our show notes. You should definitely jump on board and take a look at that one. That's one, I'd like to go to that because I'm adopted. It sounds like right up my alley, and it's something I've always enjoyed in comics. It's representation of this. Just their initial blurb. Wow, it is such an amazing part of comics history. And there's so much more than what I shared there that is available at this. So please go to their website and check out all the details to this amazing exhibit. I think it's great that comics are being honored in this capacity and really appreciate that the museum is running this particular exhibit. Our next episode, Jim and I are going to be back, and we are going to be talking about the new Wonder Woman saga, Trial of the Amazons. We will see you then.
Bye!
All right, you guys. Are you ready to sing your song?
I'd say we are. Yeah, let's sing it now.
Okay, this should be fun. Now get ready for your cue. Okay, Sean?
Okay.
Okay, Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Raging bullets time is here. We talk about what we hold dear. Comic books and TV shows. Superheroes and their clothes. Justice League and so much more. I just love Green Lantern Corps. We talk about the books we've read with spoilers straight ahead.
Okay, fellas, get ready. That was very good, Sean.
Naturally.
Jim, you're a little flat there, so be careful. Jim? Jim? Jim!
Okay. Justice League and so much more. I still love Green Lantern Corps. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show. DC Comics are what we know. The Raging Bullet Show.
Excellent job, guys.
Let's sing it again. Yeah, let's sing it again.
No, that's enough. Let's not push it.
Push it. What is that? Yeah, what are you talking about?
No, I didn't mean anything by that.
I think
Sean,
you did it right
Jim,
now. I don't know.
how long do you want the song to go?
Look, it's our production.